The sea does not forget. It swallows secrets, muffles screams, and pulls the unlucky down into its dark throat. Tonight, I will tell you of passengers who boarded magnificent floating palaces only to vanish into mist and black water, leaving nothing but silence and suspicion behind. These are the most haunting and disturbing true cruise ship disappearances that still shock, each one unraveling like a nightmare at sea. Listen closely, but never look too long into the waves. The sea stretched out in every direction, a dark, endless sheet that seemed to breathe beneath the moonlight. I remember standing at the rail on that first night, my hands gripping the polished metal, wondering why the beauty of it made me feel uneasy instead of calm. This was my first luxury cruise, the kind of trip people save for, dream about. And yet, as the engines thrummed beneath me and the ship cut forward through black water, I felt very small, as though something vast and watching stirred below the surface. I was alone, a young traveler treating myself after a long year of work. The ship was grand, gleaming with light and laughter, music spilling from bars, the scent of perfume and salt air mixing as people danced on the open decks. I told myself the unease was silly, nothing more than nerves at being adrift on such a wide, empty sea. Still, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, sure I would see someone watching me from the shadows. That was when I met her. She was leaning against the rail a few feet away, her arms wrapped tight across her chest as though she were cold, though the air was warm. Her eyes darted constantly, restless, refusing to linger on anything for long. She startled when I greeted her, as if she had not realized anyone was near. But then she smiled faintly, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. We talked quietly, the music from the deck above carrying down in muffled bursts. She told me her name, soft and hesitant, and then she said something that made my skin prickle. She confessed she could not sleep in her cabin because she was certain someone was watching her at night. I laughed gently at first, thinking she meant she felt exposed in a strange room, curtains fluttering against the glass door that opened onto her balcony. But her face darkened. "No," she said. It was not imagination. She woke each night to find the balcony door ajar, though she had locked it. She woke to the sound of curtains moving, though there was no wind. And sometimes she thought she saw a shadow leaning just beyond the glass, tall, motionless, silent. I tried to reassure her, to say perhaps it was crew checking the doors, or some draft she had not noticed. But the way she looked at me stopped my words. There was a sharpness in her gaze, a fear so deep it left no room for disbelief. She whispered that whoever it was did not want her to leave, that each time she tried to shut the curtains, she heard a fingernail tapping, slow and patient, against the glass. As she spoke, I felt that same chill creep back over me, the same dread I had tasted while staring at the ocean. She touched my arm lightly then, her hand trembling. She asked me, almost pleading, if I would come by her cabin tomorrow, just to see for myself, just to believe her. I promised I would, but as we parted and I walked back to my cabin, I could not shake the feeling that her fear was already following me, trailing behind like a shadow that belonged to neither of us. The next afternoon, after the sun had begun to dip and the ship was awash in the glow of late daylight, I found myself walking down the carpeted hallway toward her cabin. I had tried to brush off her confession from the night before, convincing myself it was nothing more than seasickness mixed with nerves. But the way her eyes had burned with pleading stayed with me. I told myself I was humoring her. Yet a knot of unease tightened in my stomach with each step. She opened the door quickly, as if she had been waiting right behind it. Her face was pale, her hands restless. Without a word, she led me inside. The cabin was neat, but the air felt strangely heavy, as though the walls held on to every breath. My gaze went immediately to the balcony door. The glass shimmered with reflected sunlight, curtains drifting faintly though the air was still. She swore she had locked it minutes before I arrived, but as I reached out, the handle shifted loosely in my palm. The latch clicked down with barely any effort. She whispered, "See? It does it by itself." And her voice trembled with something close to panic. She insisted she had woken in the night more than once to find it wide open, curtains billowing into the room, as though some unseen chest outside was breathing against them. I tried to laugh, tried to tell her it was the swell of the ship, pressure changes, something mechanical. But even as I spoke, the words felt brittle. The curtains stirred again, lifting and falling in a rhythm that was too steady, too deliberate. Her eyes filled with tears. She begged me not to dismiss her, begged me to look closer, to listen. She said sometimes when the curtains moved like that, she could hear the faintest rasp, as though someone were standing on the other side of the glass, exhaling slowly, waiting for her to draw near. I leaned against the doorframe, pretending to be unconcerned, yet my skin prickled as though the air itself was watching me. I reached for the latch again, pulling it tight, testing it. For a moment, the door held firm. Then, with a soft groan, it shifted against my grip as though something had tugged from outside. I froze, eyes darting to hers. She only nodded, whispering, "You feel it too." The sun slid lower, shadows stretching across the room, and the curtains swayed once more, though no draft touched my skin. She gripped my arm, her nails biting into my flesh. She begged me to stay the night, just to sit with her, to watch. I forced a laugh, tried to shake off the weight of the request. But my heart was already thudding hard, because in that moment, I could no longer deny what I felt. That whatever haunted her balcony wanted someone to open the door, and it was patient enough to wait. That night, I went back to her cabin, telling myself it was only to calm her nerves, to prove that nothing lurked beyond her balcony. The ship rocked gently underfoot, the hum of its engines like a heartbeat that filled every corridor. When she opened the door for me, her face was drawn and sleepless, as if she had been waiting for hours. She did not speak much, only gestured toward the balcony with a trembling hand. The glass door was firmly locked, the metal latch in place. I pressed it, pulled it, tested it again and again, until I was certain it could not move. The curtains hung still, lifeless, and for a brief moment I almost laughed. Perhaps she truly had imagined it. But then the sound came. A slow, deliberate scrape, like fingernails dragging down glass. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the muffled music echoing from some distant lounge. But it grew clearer, sharper, like something testing the barrier between inside and out. She gripped my wrist so tightly, I felt her nails dig into my skin. Her eyes were locked on the curtains, wide and wet with terror. The scratching paused, then began again higher up, traveling across the surface as though a hand pressed flat against the glass was slowly trailing from one end to the other. I stepped closer, the air tightening in my throat. The door remained locked, unmoving, but the sound persisted, steady and unmistakable. She whispered that it was calling her. At first, I thought she meant it figuratively, that her fear was pulling her imagination deeper into panic. But then I heard it too. Between the scrapes, buried low, a voice rode the sound of the sea. A whisper, drawn out and wet. shaping syllables that seemed almost human. It spoke her name. I froze, the blood draining from my face, because it was not my name I heard. It was hers, clear and undeniable, breathed into the narrow room as though from a mouth pressed right against the glass. She shook her head violently, tears streaking her cheeks, saying it had done this for nights, calling her again and again, waiting for her to answer. The scratching grew louder, the whispers more insistent. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for one awful moment I thought I saw movement through the curtain. Something shifting, something pale pressed too close against the glass. I nearly pulled the fabric aside, nearly looked, but her grip stopped me. Her voice cracked as she begged me not to, begged me never to give it the chance. We sat there together in that heavy silence, the air thick with fear, as the unseen presence outside her balcony dragged its nails across the glass one last time and then stilled. The curtains hung unmoving, but I could not shake the certainty that whatever waited outside was still there, patient, listening, whispering her name into the dark sea air. The morning came too bright, too ordinary, as though the night before had been nothing more than a dream. I remember knocking on her cabin door, half expecting her weary smile, the restless way she glanced over her shoulder. But the door stood ajar, and when I stepped inside, the silence pressed against me like a weight. The bed was empty, sheets tangled as if she had risen suddenly. Her sandals sat neatly by the balcony door, straps crossed like waiting hands. I called her name, softly at first, then louder, my voice echoing against the narrow walls. No answer. The curtains hung still, the balcony door latched from within. I felt the same prickling unease as before, the certainty that I was not alone in the room, though nothing moved except dust drifting in the beam of morning light. Her suitcase remained in the corner, clothes folded inside. On the dresser, her purse lay open, passport untouched. Nothing suggested she had left. I found a steward and asked where she had gone. His expression shifted when I gave her name. He lowered his voice, eyes sliding toward the corridor, as if afraid others might hear. He said she had jumped, that sometime during the night, she had opened her balcony door and thrown herself into the black water. The words left me stunned, heavy, impossible to believe. I demanded proof, demanded explanation. But he only shrugged. No note was found. No witness had heard a splash. The cameras showed nothing beyond her cabin door closing hours before. The ocean had swallowed her without trace. I insisted it was not possible. I told them about the scratching, about the whispers. But the crew's faces hardened, their eyes warning me that such talk was unwelcome. One officer leaned close, his voice low and stern, telling me these things happen at sea. That grief and madness take people when the horizon is endless. But there had been no madness in her eyes, only terror. She had not wanted to leap. She had been afraid of what stood on the other side of that glass, calling her again and again. The ship continued on its course, the announcement never made, her absence never spoken of among the passengers. Only I seemed to notice the empty chair at dinner, the hollow in the air where her laughter should have been. At night, I passed her cabin, the curtains drawn tight, sandals still waiting by the door. And though the latch was locked, I swear I heard it then. The faintest scrape against the glass. The sound of nails dragging slowly across the balcony door. My stomach turned cold with the knowledge that she had not jumped. She had been taken. The sea had not swallowed her. Something else had. Night returned like a weight, heavy and suffocating, the ocean beyond the rail whispering in endless tongues. The crew had gone silent on the matter, her name never spoken, her cabin already marked as vacant. But I could not stay away. Something in me needed to see for myself, to know whether the fear that had taken her still lingered. The hallway was hushed, carpet muffling my steps, lights dimmed to a tired glow. I slowed as I neared her door. It was closed, sealed, just as they had left it that morning. Yet as I drew closer, I saw it. The faint movement of the curtains beyond the glass. They swayed slowly, rhythmically, as though stirred by breath. The latch, I knew, was locked. I had seen it myself. The cabin should have been still, abandoned, untouched. But the fabric moved with a strange patience, not fluttering like cloth caught in wind, but pulsing, drawing in and out as if the room itself was alive. My chest tightened, the air catching in my throat. I took another step, and that was when I saw it. A shape shifted behind the fabric, faint but undeniable. A figure outlined by the dim light spilling from the balcony. It stood motionless, tall, head bent slightly, as though listening. I could not see a face, only the suggestion of something pressed too close to the glass. I froze where I stood, every instinct telling me to run, yet my feet refused to move. The curtain shivered again, and in that subtle motion, I caught the faintest glimpse of a hand. Pale, thin, fingers splayed against the glass as if to test its strength. My pulse thundered in my ears, but louder still was the memory of her voice, whispering that the thing outside had been calling her name night after night until she could not resist. I understood then that whatever I was seeing was not gone with her, had not sunk to the depths when she vanished. It remained, waiting, as if the glass between worlds was thinner on that balcony than anywhere else on the ship. The hand slowly withdrew, melting into shadow. The curtain fell still, limp once more. And then, from within the silence, came a soft sound. A tap, slow, deliberate. Once, twice, 3 times. The same rhythm she had described, the sound that had followed her into madness. I stumbled back, breaking from the trance, the corridor spinning around me. My heart screamed for me to run, and I did. Down the long hallway, away from that sealed cabin where the curtains stirred, though no breath of wind touched them. But even as I fled, I knew the truth with a clarity that sickened me. She had not been the last. The shadow behind the glass was patient. It was waiting for another name to call. And in the dark echo of my steps, I feared it had already chosen mine. The port in Miami was alive with noise and light, a tide of voices rising and falling as thousands of us moved toward the ship. The air smelled of salt and fuel, the promise of escape humming in every excited laugh. I remember the sound of rolling suitcases on pavement, the clink of passports against counters, and the way the massive vessel loomed above us like a floating city, waiting to swallow its inhabitants. Families posed for pictures, couples kissed beneath banners, strangers clutched tickets with nervous excitement. I told myself this would be the voyage where I could finally leave behind the weight of routine and let the sea carry me somewhere new. The line shuffled forward, and I showed my passport, the official stamping it without a glance. I crossed the gangway, heart lightened by the thought of the ocean's horizon stretching open. But then, over the loudspeaker, came a voice that stilled the joy in the air. A name was called. A woman's name, repeated once, then again, more insistent, echoing through the terminal. Her family stood nearby, a husband with 2 children clinging to his legs. Their faces were pale, eyes darting toward the ship as they insisted she was with them, had been only moments before. He shouted that she walked into the terminal beside them, that she showed her ticket, that she laughed at the security guard's joke. Yet now, in the shuffle of passengers, she was gone. At first, no one panicked. It was easy to imagine she had lagged behind, stepped aside to check her bag, perhaps stopped at the restroom. But as minutes stretched, the tone of the announcements shifted, each call for her sharper, more urgent. Her name carried through the speakers like a warning. I watched the husband clutch his phone, showing pictures of her to officials who nodded without expression. His children cried softly, asking where their mother had gone. Crew members searched, retracing her steps. Cameras showed her entering the terminal, ticket in hand, luggage tagged. Yet the footage never showed her boarding the ship. Somewhere between the crowd and the gangway, she had simply dissolved. The line behind me pressed forward, restless. People murmured, speculating. Some shook their heads, dismissing it as confusion, but others grew quiet, eyes flicking toward the vessel, toward the shadowed windows staring blankly over the port. The family remained by the counter, the husband pleading, his voice breaking as officials assured him she would turn up. But even as I crossed the deck and felt the ship begin to breathe beneath my feet, I could not shake the image of her vanishing. She had been there, alive, warm, speaking, and then she was gone, as if the ship itself had drawn her in before she ever set foot on its floors. And in that moment, though the music blared and champagne glasses clinked, the air tasted of something hollow. It felt like we had already lost one of us to the sea before the voyage had even begun. They gathered us in one of the lounges, a place that smelled of polished wood and champagne, and tried to smooth over the unease. Smiles too wide, voices too steady, assuring us everything was fine. But whispers traveled faster than reassurance. Everyone had heard her name over the loudspeaker, felt the sharp edge in her husband's voice, seen the way security officers moved through the crowd like hounds on a scent. Something was wrong, and no amount of wine glasses clinking could erase it. Later that night, I overheard fragments of what the family had been told. The cameras showed her walking through the terminal. She appeared calm, moving with the tide of passengers, her luggage tagged, her ticket in hand. She laughed at something her husband said. She passed the checkpoint without issue, all of it captured on clear video. But then, somewhere between the moment she stepped onto the gangway and the place where the ship's cameras should have caught her crossing onto the deck, she disappeared. There was no image of her boarding, not a single frame. Every other passenger could be accounted for, each face tracked from land to ship, but not hers. It was as though the moment she crossed that narrow bridge between shore and sea, she had dissolved into the air. Her family refused to believe it. Her husband shouted at officers, demanding they check again, that they pull every scrap of footage. He swore she had walked beside him until the very last step. Yet the screens showed him alone, hand clutching at empty space, his children trailing behind him. No one beside him. No shadow, no blur, not even the outline of a body erased. Just absence. I felt the chill in that revelation spread across the ship like frost. To vanish in the middle of the ocean, yes. There was terror in that, but it could be explained. To fall overboard, to be claimed by waves, was tragedy but not mystery. But to vanish on the gangway, under bright lights, in front of cameras and crowds, was something else. Something that felt older and hungrier, as though the ship itself had chosen her before she even touched its floorboards. Passengers whispered theories in the hallways. Some said she had slipped away deliberately, hiding in the terminal for reasons unknown. Others suggested abduction, though no one could explain how it happened without a trace. A few shook their heads and muttered about bad luck, omens, curses tied to ships that had sailed too long and seen too much. That night, as the vessel pulled away from Miami and the horizon swallowed the last flicker of land. I stood at the rail and imagined her stepping into the gangway, and then into nothing. No splash, no scream, just gone. And I wondered if somewhere in that narrow space between dock and ship, something invisible waited, something that claimed her as its own. The sea does not always need waves to take someone. Sometimes it only needs silence. They opened her cabin the next morning, the family standing just behind security as the door swung inward. I lingered at the end of the hall, one of many passengers pretending not to watch, though curiosity dragged us closer. The room was quiet, untouched, as though no one had ever stepped inside. Yet her luggage was there, neatly stacked against the wall, tags from Miami still tied to the handles. Her passport rested on the table by the bed, beside a folded itinerary, her name printed clearly on each page. A purse sat open, wallet tucked inside, credit cards untouched, phone switched off as if it had never been charged for the trip. The bed was made, sheets perfectly smooth, pillows aligned, not a single crease to suggest she had ever laid her head there. There was no sign of struggle, no spilled belongings, no broken latch, no overturned chair. Everything was arranged with a precision that felt almost staged. It was not the mess of someone in distress, not the chaos of sudden departure. It was a room waiting for a guest who never arrived. Her husband stepped forward, his voice trembling as he insisted this was wrong, that she should have been there, that she had unpacked herself, that they had joked about the balcony view before dinner. His children cried, their small voices echoing in the narrow cabin. But security shook their heads. The sheets were untouched, the minibar unopened, the safe locked with no code set. I felt the weight of it pressing into my chest as I watched. Her absence was louder than presence, louder than any argument. She had been swallowed not only from the cameras, but from her own existence. Her things had made the journey, but she had not. It was as if her belongings had crossed the threshold without her, as though the ship had accepted the objects but refused the body that owned them. Passengers whispered again, theories shifting into something darker. How could a woman's luggage arrive, her documents remain, her bedstand pristine, while she herself vanished into thin air? Some muttered about paperwork errors, others about elaborate plans to disappear. But their voices were thin, brittle, as though even they did not believe the excuses they mouthed. I lingered at her door longer than I should have. In the silence, I thought I felt something pressing from the other side, like a draft that had no source. The curtains at the balcony swayed faintly, though no window was open. I caught myself staring, wondering if she had reached for those curtains, if she had looked out into the endless dark and seen something that pulled her away without leaving a trace. When they closed the door, sealing her cabin again, it felt less like a room and more like a shrine, a place set aside for someone who had never truly been there. And as I walked away, I could not shake the thought that the untouched sheets held not comfort, but refusal. The ship had made its decision. She was never meant to rest there. Night on the ship carried a strange kind of silence, not the quiet of still land, but the hush of engines buried deep, the vastness of black water pressing against metal walls. I could not sleep, restless with the memory of her untouched cabin. Around 2 a.m, the corridor outside my room stirred with faint movement, soft enough to make me doubt it at first. Then I heard the low murmur of voices, one sharp, frantic, breaking through the stillness. It was her husband. He had been given the adjoining cabin with his children, though the walls there seemed thinner than anywhere else on the ship. I heard him crying out, his voice tight with disbelief, calling her name again and again. Later, he told us what he heard, that her voice drifted through the hallway like wind through a tunnel, calling to him in the exact cadence she used when she wanted him to come quickly. Not a scream, not desperation. Just her voice, alive, familiar, reaching across the silence. He swore it began faint, like an echo, but grew clearer until it pressed against the door itself. He said he opened it without thinking, expecting her to be standing there in the dim corridor light. But the hall was empty, stretching in both directions, quiet except for the muffled hum of the engines. He stepped out, still calling, his bare feet cold against the carpet. His children stirred inside, frightened by his shouting. Neighbors opened their doors, faces pale, asking what had happened. He told them, his voice breaking, that she had been there, right outside, that she had called for him the way she always did when she was lost in a crowd. But the officers who came later found nothing. The cameras in that corridor showed only him, opening the door, stepping out into emptiness. There was no shadow, no movement but his. Passengers whispered about grief, about a mind unraveling in the face of loss. Some shook their heads with pity, but I believed him. I had heard the sharpness in his voice, the raw terror in the way he shouted into the night. It was not madness I had heard. It was recognition. That morning, his children clung to him in silence, their eyes red, their faces hollow with fear they could not explain. They said nothing, but I saw it in their expressions. They had heard it too. A woman's voice drifting through the hallway, warm, insistent, impossibly close. And as I lay awake the following night, listening to the groan of the sea against the hull, I realized what chilled me most was not that she was gone. It was that she might still be here, pacing the corridors unseen, her voice moving like a draft that brushed against doors, waiting for someone to follow. The final night came heavy with exhaustion, the kind that clings after too many days of restless sleep and whispered fears that spread like mold. The ship was quiet, the laughter from the first nights gone, passengers speaking in hushed tones, glancing toward the cabin that remained locked and unclaimed. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the vibration of the engines, a low reminder that we were still moving through endless black water. I told myself I would sleep, that I would not think of her voice in the hall, of the husband's cries, of the untouched sheets. But then I heard it, soft at first, so faint I thought it was only the sea pressing against the hull. A low sob, muffled, fragile, yet close, too close. I held my breath and listened. It came again, clearer this time, the sound of a woman crying just beyond my cabin door. My heart clenched in my chest. I sat up slowly, every instinct screaming at me to stay still, to ignore it. Yet the sobbing grew sharper, as if someone stood with their face pressed against the wood, their tears soaking through. A voice broke from the sound, thin and trembling, not quite words, but grief pouring out in broken syllables. I could not stop myself. With shaking hands, I rose and stepped toward the door. The handle was cool beneath my palm, and for a long moment I stood frozen, afraid that opening it would mean letting something in. Still, I pulled it wide. The corridor stretched empty before me, dimly lit by flickering lamps. No one was there. The silence was absolute. And then I looked down. The carpet outside my cabin was soaked, darkened by a trail of water that stretched in uneven steps down the hall. Bare footprints, small and delicate, pressed into the fibers. They glistened under the light, dripping as though the sea itself clung to whoever had walked there. The trail led away from my door, vanishing into the far curve of the corridor where the light dissolved into shadow. I stood frozen, unable to call out, my throat dry with dread. Because I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me, that I was not alone. She was still walking these halls, unseen, her cries slipping beneath doors, her wet steps marking her path. The ocean had not taken her. The ship had. I closed the door slowly, the sobbing fading back into silence. But I knew it would not end. Not tonight, not ever. Someone had vanished between gangway and deck, dissolved into nothing while the cameras blinked blind. And now she moved where no one should move, her sorrow drifting like seawater through the air. And as I lay back down, trembling in the darkness, I could still hear the faint sound of crying just outside my door, as if she were waiting for me to open it again, to follow the footprints into the endless shadow. The ship after midnight felt like a different world. The laughter of the day was gone, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of sandals on deck, all of it replaced by a hush that carried its own weight. Only the hum of the engines remained, steady and low, like some immense heartbeat thrumming through the steel beneath my feet. I wandered without purpose, half out of restlessness, half out of that strange compulsion the sea seems to press onto the mind. The corridors gleamed with polish, brass rails glinting faintly in the low lights. But they felt abandoned, stretched too long, as though I was walking through the veins of a creature that never slept. I passed through levels I had not explored before, drawn by the silence, by the feeling of stepping into places no passenger was meant to find. It was at the stern, down a narrow hallway lined with service doors, that I saw it. A stairwell recessed into shadow, its metal railing dull with age, its steps leading down into dim light. At first, I thought it was nothing unusual. Ships had dozens of stairwells, some for crew, some for emergencies. But when I glanced at the small deck map bolted to the wall, the space where I stood was blank. There was no stairwell marked, no downward passage. Just steel and storage, where I now stared into shadows. A draft breathed up from the darkness, faint but cold enough to raise the hair on my arms. The hum of the engines seemed louder here, resonating off the walls like a voice too deep to understand. I leaned over the railing, peering down, but the light fixtures along the stairwell were dim, their bulbs flickering as though struggling to stay alive. I told myself it was nothing, perhaps just an oversight in the maps, a forgotten access point. Still, I felt that quiet tug, the same pull that had brought me wandering in the first place. My hand brushed the railing, slick with condensation. And for a moment I thought I heard something beneath the thrum of engines, a faint shuffle, a sound too deliberate to be the ship's movements. I glanced back into the corridor, empty, silent. Then I turned once more toward the stairwell, and the shadows seemed to stretch lower, deeper, farther than they had before. It was not just a stairwell now. It felt like an opening into somewhere that should not exist. My heart beat faster, a strange mixture of dread and curiosity binding me to the spot. The ship was vast, I reminded myself. It was easy to get lost, to misinterpret spaces after dark. And yet, staring into that stairwell, I could not shake the thought that it had been waiting for someone to find it. I took one step onto the first stair. The metal groaned under my weight, and the sound echoed down farther than it should have, vanishing into an endless hollow. The air grew colder against my skin. And with that step, I knew I had crossed into something the ship did not want on its maps, something meant to remain unseen. The first few steps carried me only into shadow, the glow from the corridor above fading quickly as though the light itself was reluctant to follow. My hand gripped the railing, slick with condensation, each bead of water clinging to my skin like sweat that was not mine. The air grew colder as I descended, not the sharp chill of open sea air, but a damp heaviness, the kind that seeps into bone and lingers. The hum of the engines deepened, vibrating through the metal beneath my feet. Each step creaked, the sound carrying downward into the hollow, yet never returning as an echo. It was as though the stairwell swallowed sound, drinking it into its endless throat. I told myself I would only go a little farther, just enough to see where it led. But the dim lights above sputtered and dimmed until I was walking in near darkness. The bulbs along the wall flickered weakly, their glow pale and sickly, straining against the black. I could not see the bottom. No matter how far I went, the stairs stretched on before me, each step looking the same as the last, each landing promising an end that never arrived. The repetition gnawed at me, the unsettling sense that I was descending deeper than the ship's hull should allow. Moisture dripped steadily from above, falling onto my shoulders, my hair, running down the rail in thin streams. It carried the smell of rust and salt, metallic and sour, as if the stairwell had been drowned once and never fully dried. My breath puffed in small clouds now, visible in the failing light, though I knew no ship corridor should ever be this cold. At one point, I stopped and turned, expecting to see the faint rectangle of the corridor above. But the space behind me was dark, swallowed completely. I could no longer see where I had come from, only the steps ahead, descending into nothing. Panic stirred in me, urging me to climb back up, to flee. Yet another part of me whispered that the top was already gone, sealed away. I tightened my grip on the rail, forcing myself to keep moving. My pulse hammered in my ears, but beneath it, I swore I heard something else. The faintest sound of water sloshing, as if the steps below me were filling with a tide that crept upward, waiting for me. I quickened my pace, heart racing, though the dark only thickened around me. I do not know how long I descended. Time stretched thin, warped by the sameness of each step, the cold pressing harder, the air thinning. But the deeper I went, the more certain I became that this stairwell was not built for crew or for passengers. It was not built for escape. It was built for descent. And something far below was waiting for me to arrive. The silence grew heavier with every step, pressing in on me until even the thrum of the engines felt distant, like a memory instead of a sound. My breath came quick, shallow, fogging the air before my face, and that was when I realized something was wrong. The mist of my exhalation was not alone. From below came another rhythm, slow, labored, dragging through the dark, breathing, heavy, ragged, the kind of breath pulled through a chest that had been straining too long. It rose up the stairwell toward me, echoing faint but unmistakable. I froze, one foot hovering above the next step. My ears strained, my skin prickling as I tried to place it. This was no trick of machinery, no groan of steel or sigh of pipes. It was alive, a sound of lungs pulling air, of weight shifting somewhere just out of sight. I leaned over the railing, peering down, but the dim bulbs revealed nothing but the continuation of stairs into endless shadow. I called out softly, my voice catching on the silence, but nothing answered, only the breathing. I told myself it had to be a crew member, someone caught in the same passage, though I knew in my bones it was not. The cadence was wrong, too irregular, rasping as though each inhale scraped against broken glass. Whoever it was, they lingered always just beyond reach. I descended faster, my steps ringing against the slick metal, convinced I would finally meet the figure waiting below. Yet no matter how far I went, the sound remained the same distance from me, hovering just beneath my feet. Each time I paused, it paused with me. Each time I drew breath, theirs followed, staggered as if mocking. Minutes stretched like hours. My legs ached, my throat dry. But still I pressed on, unable to turn back, trapped by the awful certainty that if I did, I would find that breathing behind me instead. I began to wonder if the stairwell was not leading me anywhere at all. If each step simply folded back into itself, trapping me in an endless loop with something waiting beneath, patient and cruel. My vision blurred in the dimness, but the sound only grew clearer, closer, until it felt as though whoever was breathing shared the same air as me, pulling it away before I could. I gripped the railing harder, my hand slipping on the damp metal, my pulse hammering. The urge to scream burned in my throat, to shatter the silence with proof that I was still real, still human. But I knew the moment I made that sound, the thing below would answer. So I descended in silence, breath trembling, listening as the ragged inhale and exhale followed me faithfully, step by step, never closer, never farther, as though the stairwell itself was alive and breathing in the dark with me. I do not remember when I decided to stop going down. The breathing below had settled into me like a sickness, my ears ringing with it, my chest tightening until each inhale felt borrowed. At some point, I realized I would never reach the source. The steps stretched too long, repeating without end, and the darkness only deepened. My fear turned itself around inside me, whispering that I had to go back, that whatever was below wanted me to keep moving toward it. So I turned, gripping the slick rail, and looked up. My stomach dropped. The stairwell above no longer looked like the path I had taken. It was stretched, elongated, impossibly high. The rectangle of faint light that should have been close by was nothing more than a pinprick now. So far away, it looked like a star. My legs trembled, already aching, as if I had walked for miles into the ship's belly without noticing. The air behind me felt thicker, heavier, pressing on my back as though urging me downward. I forced myself upward, step after step, my breath rasping in my throat. Every rise of the stair felt steeper, my calves burning with effort, sweat mixing with the condensation on the rail. The hum of the engines seemed distant now, muffled under layers of steel, and I could not tell if I was moving closer to safety or only spiraling deeper into some endless coil. Time warped. I counted steps without meaning to, losing track at hundreds, maybe thousands. My hands ached from clutching the railing, my knees weak, yet still the top hovered impossibly far. Each time I paused, I swore the faint light retreated, sliding away just as I thought I gained ground. And then, as if to mock me, the breathing returned. Not from below this time, but from somewhere in the walls around me, close enough to feel on my skin. It came in short, wet bursts, uneven, as though something crawled in the shadows that pressed against the stairwell. My chest tightened with panic. But I kept climbing, each step heavier than the last, my body screaming for rest. At one point, I stopped and leaned against the rail, gasping, and looked down. The steps disappeared into black, no trace of where I had begun. The thought struck me like a blade, that there might be no top, no bottom, only the endless act of climbing. I staggered onward, pain tearing through my legs, lungs burning. The faint light above flickered, barely more than a dying candle now, unreachable. It dawned on me that I could climb forever and never leave this place, that the stairwell grew with each step, stretching to contain me. And behind me, in that thick silence, I swore I felt something start to climb too. I do not know how long I climbed. My body felt hollowed, stripped of strength, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. The stairwell had stretched into something eternal, and I was certain I would die in its coils, my name forgotten, my body swallowed into the metal ribs of the ship. Yet at some point, without warning, the darkness shifted. The air grew warmer. My next step rang differently beneath my foot, and when I looked up, the corridor above was suddenly there. I staggered through the doorway, half collapsing onto the carpet. My clothes were damp, my hair plastered to my skin, my breath scraping out in ragged bursts. For a long moment, I lay there staring at the ordinary lights overhead, terrified that if I blinked, the stairwell would open beneath me again and drag me back down. When I finally looked up, I saw faces. Crew members, flashlights in hand, voices sharp with alarm. A search party had been sweeping the ship, though I did not yet know why. They crowded around me, questions snapping in quick bursts, asking where I had been, what I had seen. I tried to answer, but my voice cracked with exhaustion. My words sounded strange, even to me. It was only when another passenger stepped forward, eyes wide with grief, that I understood. Someone else had gone missing, a young woman. She had left her cabin late that night, telling her friend she was taking a walk to clear her head. She had never returned. They said her trail ended at the stern. They said a witness had seen her standing at the mouth of a stairwell that did not appear on any map. One hand on the railing, her expression strangely calm. She was last seen stepping into the shadows, descending into the dark. The crew spoke in low voices, their eyes darting toward the very place I had just emerged from, though none of them dared approach it. When I tried to tell them I'd been down there too, that the stairwell stretched impossibly, that something had been breathing with me in the dark, they silenced me with sharp looks. They did not want the other passengers to hear, but I could see the truth in their faces. They knew. This was not the first time someone had vanished into that stairwell, and it would not be the last. That night, as the search dragged on fruitlessly, I lay in my cabin with my body aching, my mind replaying every step I had taken in that endless descent. I could still feel the cold rail under my hand, the damp air in my lungs, and worse, I could still hear the breathing. Closer now, as though the thing that had followed me in the stairwell had not stayed behind. The passenger was never found, and when the ship finally docked days later, the stairwell was gone. No door, no opening, only smooth wall where I swore I had entered. But sometimes, even now, I dream of its metal steps stretching downward forever, and of a voice waiting patiently for me to return. The first time I heard about it was in whispers, exchanged over late-night drinks when the music had quieted and the sea pressed too close against the windows. Passengers spoke carefully, as if afraid the crew might overhear. They said there was a cabin on deck 7 that no one entered, a cabin the staff refused to discuss. Its number had been scratched out, its door chained from the outside like something dangerous lived within. Some said it had been locked for decades, others that it was sealed only after something terrible happened on a voyage not long ago. Curiosity gripped me like a fever. On ships like this, every cabin was designed for comfort, for escape, for dreams of luxury drifting across endless blue. The thought of one being erased, forbidden, turned my stomach. It was not just a locked door, it was a secret. And secrets at sea are heavy things. I found myself wandering to deck 7 late one evening, moving past the quiet hallways where most passengers had long since gone to bed. The carpet muted my steps, but each one felt louder than it should, echoing against the silence. The lights there seemed dimmer, their glow strained, as though they too wished to keep away from that part of the ship. And then I saw it. The cabin door stood at the far end of the hall, its number plate gouged until only deep scratches remained, jagged scars across metal. Heavy chains looped across the frame, padlocked tight, links dark with rust that should not have been possible on a ship so meticulously polished. Someone had painted over the edges of the door once, but the paint had peeled, revealing claw-like marks beneath, long streaks as though something inside had tried to get out. I stood there with my hand hovering, not quite touching the cold metal, but close enough to feel its chill seep into my skin. The corridor seemed to breathe around me, air thickening, the hum of the engines dulling until I could hear only my pulse. For a long moment, I thought I heard something on the other side. Not movement exactly, but the faint suggestion of presence, like a chair creaking under unseen weight, or the sigh of someone sitting just beyond reach. My throat tightened, every instinct screaming to step back. Yet I could not. The door's silence was heavier than sound. I walked away finally, though it felt more like retreat. Even as I turned the corner, I could not shake the sensation that the cabin was aware of me, that behind the scratched-out number and the chains, something had shifted, waiting. Later, when I tried to ask a steward about it, his smile froze on his face, his eyes sliding away. He pretended not to hear, but I knew by his silence that the rumor was no rumor at all. The cabin was real. The secret was real. And whatever had been locked inside was still there, chained in darkness, listening for anyone who dared to stop and linger. It was past midnight when I heard it for the first time. I had been walking the quieter decks, restless and unable to sleep, the ship's motion rocking me into something that felt closer to dread than comfort. The hallways were empty, lights low, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I should have turned back to my cabin. But then it came, the sound of laughter. It floated from ahead of me, light at first, the lilting giggle of a woman enjoying some private joke. It echoed strangely against the walls, out of place in the still corridor. My skin prickled as I realized where it was coming from. The locked cabin, the one with chains bolted across its door. I stopped, my breath shallow, straining to listen. The laughter rose again, louder this time, brittle at the edges, like someone trying too hard to sound happy. Then it broke, splintered into words. A woman's voice muffled through the door, calling out. Not laughter now, but pleading. She was asking for help. The sound threaded itself into me, cold and sharp. I stepped closer before I realized what I was doing, the air tightening with every inch. My hand hovered near the chain, though I never dared touch it. The voice called again, her tone cracked, urgent, pressing against the silence of the hallway. And then, nothing. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, like a curtain falling. No laughter, no voice, no sound at all. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade, leaving me stranded in a quiet so deep I could hear my own breath rasping in my throat. I stood frozen, staring at the scratched-out number, at the door chained as though the steel itself could not be trusted to hold whatever waited inside. The urge to run pulled at me, but my body would not obey. My ears strained for any sign of her again, for the faintest creak or whisper. But the silence pressed back harder, thick enough to choke on. At last, I forced myself to turn away. Every step down that corridor echoing too loudly, my shadow lurching across the walls like something separate from me. The farther I walked, the more convinced I became that the laughter and the plea had not been a mistake, not some trick of sleeplessness. Someone, or something, had been inside that cabin. When I finally reached my own room, I locked the door and slid the chain across, though it offered no comfort. My ears rang with the memory of her laugh, sweet at first, then twisted into a cry for help. I lay awake until dawn, knowing the silence outside my door was only a thin disguise. The locked cabin was not empty. It never had been. And whatever was inside had learned how to speak. The next day, I could not stop thinking about it. The laughter that had turned to pleading, the way silence had rushed in like a tide to smother it. I told myself I would avoid that part of the ship. But the thought gnawed at me until I found my steps drifting back to deck 7. The hallway looked the same as before, quiet, indifferent. But the chain door at the end seemed to lean into the corridor like a presence that knew I had heard it. I wasn't alone this time. A man in uniform stood at the far end, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed on the door. He must have heard my approach because he turned quickly, eyes sharp, narrowing as if I had intruded on something sacred. I stammered a question, asking lightly about the cabin, about why it was sealed. His face changed in an instant, his expression hardening with the kind of fear men try to bury under authority. He told me not to linger there. His voice was low, almost a growl, but the edge of warning was real. He said passengers had a way of drifting too close, of pressing their ears to that door, and that nothing good ever came from it. His words held weight, not rehearsed like the practiced denials I'd heard from stewards. This was confession, grudging and grim. When I pressed further, he glanced down the hall, ensuring no one else was near. Then he muttered it. A story carried in whispers among crew, passed down over years but never spoken to passengers. Decades ago, he said, a young couple had boarded the ship for their honeymoon. They were happy, radiant, celebrated by strangers. But one night, the bride vanished. The cabin they shared was found with blood on the sheets. The husband claimed he had woken in the night to find her gone, that he searched frantically, but there was no sign of her. Crew combed the decks, questioned everyone, but she was never seen again. Only the stained bed remained, a grotesque testament to something that had slipped through the cracks of explanation. The cabin was sealed soon after, the chains added when other guests reported voices, laughter, and sometimes screams echoing from behind the door. Some claimed to see a woman's figure in the balcony glass, her face pale, her hands pressed against it as though trying to escape. The guard's voice dropped lower, nearly a whisper now. He said the blood never fully washed away. No matter how many times the linens were replaced, the stain returned, seeping through like a wound that could not heal. That was why they chained the cabin. That was why they erased its number. He looked at me then, his eyes hollow, and told me to keep walking, never stop near that door again. And though I nodded, pretending I would listen, I knew the warning had come too late. I had already lingered. I had already heard her voice. And the silence after had followed me back to my own cabin. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the guard's face, the way his voice had dropped when he spoke of the blood that would not fade. I tried to tell myself it was only a story, something designed to keep curious passengers from wandering. But my mind would not release it. When I finally drifted into dreams, the ship itself seemed to sink into me, and I was back on deck 7. The corridor stretched long and quiet, light flickering weakly against the walls. The chain door waited at the end, darker than the others, the scratched number glinting faintly like an open wound. I stood frozen as the chain rattled once, sharp and metallic, breaking the silence. Slowly, the lock began to shift, links sliding against one another with the sound of something breathing through steel. The door opened, inch by inch, and from the gap emerged hands. Pale, thin, fingers stretched unnaturally long, nails dark and broken. They gripped the frame and reached for me, trembling but determined, dragging against the walls as they pulled the door wider. My heart thundered in my chest as the hands unfurled, reaching with a hunger that felt centuries old. I could not move. My feet rooted to the carpet as those hands curled around my arms, cold as ice, the grip sinking through flesh to bone. They yanked, and I stumbled forward, pulled toward the darkness beyond the door. A shape shifted inside, a figure rising from the shadows, a face pale and drenched with something darker than water. Her mouth opened, her laughter bleeding into sobs, her voice echoing the very one I had heard in the hallway. She whispered, "Help me," but the words were a trap, a lure. I woke thrashing, my sheets tangled around me, sweat soaking my skin. My chest heaved as if I had been running, and the air in my cabin felt too thin, too heavy to breathe. I told myself it was only a dream, only the weight of stories sinking too deep into the mind. But then I heard it. The chain. It rattled faintly, somewhere beyond my door, the sound unmistakable. A metallic clink, hesitant at first, then firmer, sharper, as though unseen hands were testing the links, straining against them. My heart froze, my ears straining. But the sound went on, steady, deliberate. It was not imagination. It was not memory. The chain that sealed that cabin was moving. I sat rigid in the dark, unable to move, waiting for the noise to stop. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. And just when silence returned, just when I thought I might have been spared, I heard the faintest whisper ride the still air, a voice curling through the walls, soft and broken. It was laughter again, low and fragile, and it was coming from somewhere much closer than Deck 7. The final night came cloaked in unease, the ship quieter than it had been all voyage. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, though no one admitted why. Perhaps they too had heard things in the dark. Perhaps they too felt the weight of something moving just beyond sight. I walked the halls restless, drawn again toward Deck 7, as if some thread bound me to it. My legs moved against reason, my pulse loud in my ears. The corridor stretched before me, dim and hollow, the air heavy with the stale scent of rust. And there, at the far end, I saw it, the cabin, the one that should have been sealed, chained, silenced. But the door no longer held its scarred defiance. It was ajar, gaping slightly, rocking faintly on its hinges as if it had only just been opened. The chain that had once bound it hung loose, its links fractured, the padlock cracked clean through. The broken metal swayed gently, tapping against the frame with the soft rhythm of a heartbeat. My throat tightened as I stared, waiting for someone, anyone, to step forward and shut it. No one did. The hall was empty. It was just me and the open door. I forced myself closer, every step dragging like stone. My breath came shallow, the silence deepening around me until even the steady hum of the engines seemed to vanish. The scratched-out number gleamed in the low light, and beyond it, only darkness yawned. Not the darkness of an unlit room, but something deeper, thicker, alive. It felt as though the shadows pressed outward, eager to spill into the corridor. I stopped just short of the threshold, my heart slamming so hard I thought it might burst. The air seeping from within was colder than the rest of the ship, damp and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that turned my stomach. I thought of the story the guard had whispered, of blood-soaking sheets that could never be cleaned. I thought of the laughter that had twisted into pleading, of the hands that had reached for me in dreams. The silence in that moment was unbearable, swollen with expectation. I swear I saw movement deep inside, the faint suggestion of a figure shifting, watching, waiting. The shadows seemed to ripple, pulling inward like a breath. Then the chain tapped once more against the frame, sharp and final, and the door creaked wider, as though inviting me in. I stumbled back, every instinct screaming, my skin burning with the certainty that if I crossed that threshold, I would never return. The corridor behind me stretched long and empty, but I fled it anyway, refusing to look back. When I reached my own cabin, I slammed the door and locked it, though I knew no lock on that ship could hold against what had broken those chains. And even now, when I close my eyes, I still see that cabin door yawning wide, the darkness inside alive, patient, hungry, waiting for another night when it will not be ignored. The night was calm, the ocean stretched black and endless, the stars sharp as shattered glass scattered across the sky. I was on the open deck, a drink in my hand, the low murmur of conversation around me blending with the hum of the engines. It felt safe in that moment, as if the sea could be gentle, as if it might let us pass without notice. And then it happened. A blur of motion at the edge of my vision. A man breaking into a run, his face twisted with something I could not name. Before anyone could react, he vaulted the rail. One clean, desperate leap, and then he was gone. His body vanished into the black water below, with barely a splash, swallowed by the sea as though it had been waiting for him. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the shouts began. Glasses toppled, chairs scraped back, voices rose sharp with panic. Alarms blared, tearing the calm wide open. Crew rushed to the rails, lights cutting across the surface of the waves. The ship shuddered beneath us as the engines died, slowing to a crawl before halting altogether. I ran to the side, leaning over, my eyes straining against the dark. The water boiled with white light as search beams swept across, but there was nothing. No arms thrashing, no head breaking the surface, no voice calling for help. Just the endless sea, rolling gently, uncaring. Passengers clutched at each other, some weeping, some muttering in disbelief. I heard one say he had been pushed, another swear they saw someone else close behind him, a shadow leaning over just before he jumped. The rumors spread quickly, fanned by fear, twisting into something uglier with each retelling. Crew lowered lifeboats, their spotlights cutting sharp paths through the dark water. The search dragged on, voices crackling through radios, but the ocean gave nothing back. No sign of him, no floating body, only the slow rhythm of waves slapping against steel. I stood there long after most had drifted back inside, stunned and pale, unable to accept how fast it had happened. One moment he was among us, drinking, breathing, alive. The next, gone. Not into distance or shadow, but into nothing. And as I watched the black surface ripple under the glare of the lights, a thought settled in my mind, colder than the night air. The sea had not taken him by chance. It had claimed him, as if it had been waiting for him, calling him. And when the moment came, he had answered. The alarms eventually quieted, the ship drifting in unnatural silence. But I stayed at the rail, staring into the dark water, certain that if I looked long enough, I would see him staring back up at me, just beneath the surface, mouth open in a scream I would never hear. The ship had stopped completely now, the night air thick with tension. Searchlights burned across the surface of the ocean, cutting brilliant white paths over black water. Every beam revealed nothing but waves, rolling endlessly, cresting and vanishing, slapping against the hull with a rhythm that felt mocking. Crews shouted to one another, their voices sharp, desperate, bouncing off the steel walls. The passengers pressed against the rails, eyes wide and unblinking, as though sheer will could force the man to reappear. Lifeboats dropped into the sea with hollow thuds, engines sputtering to life as they fanned out into the dark. Their beams stabbed at the water, moving in sweeping arcs, dragging long streaks of light that seemed to stretch farther than the horizon itself. Radios crackled with clipped voices, questions and coordinates. But there was no triumph, no cry of discovery. Only the repeating report. Nothing. No movement. No sign. The man had vanished, as though the sea had closed over him and erased the moment entirely. I strained my ears for a sound, splashing, a scream, even the faintest call for help. But the night was deafening. All I heard was the groan of the ship and the slap of the water, steady and cruel. People around me whispered, their voices trembling, feeding each other's fear. Some said he had wanted to disappear, that he had leapt willingly, lost to despair. Others argued, saying they had seen his body arc wrong, as if forced, as if pushed by invisible hands. A woman near me insisted she heard him cry out not before the leap, but after, muffled by the ocean's throat, a cry cut short and smothered. I could not shake the image of him running, of the strange certainty in his stride, as though he had been following a call no one else could hear. The lifeboats circled again, their engines buzzing like insects over the surface. Crew leaned over their edges, nets ready, hands outstretched, waiting to grasp even the faintest piece of clothing, a floating arm, anything at all. But there was nothing. No bubbles, no drag of current, no trail. The sea had swallowed clean, leaving no proof he had ever been there. An officer barked for calm, telling us these things happen, that searches take time. But even he looked pale beneath the floodlights. His hands trembled as he adjusted the radio at his side. He knew as well as the rest of us that the water should have given something back. Even a body has weight, and weight does not vanish. Yet here, it had. I gripped the railing until my knuckles ached, staring into the moving black, fighting the sense that if I looked long enough, I might see not waves, but faces pressing just beneath the surface. Dozens of them, silent, waiting, watching. And as the search dragged on, fruitless, hopeless, I realized the sea was not searching with us. It was keeping its prize. And it was not done yet. By the next morning, the whispers had spread through every corner of the ship, curling through dining halls and corridors like smoke. Few spoke openly of what they had seen, but when voices dropped low and eyes darted toward the windows, the stories carried the same refrain. He had not jumped alone. He had been pushed. I overheard it first at breakfast. Two passengers leaning across their table, their words urgent, fearful. They swore they had seen another figure on the deck that night, close behind him as he ran. A shadow moving wrong against the light, as if it belonged to no one. Hands raised, pressing against his back at the exact moment he cleared the rail. The woman's voice shook as she said she saw him stumble mid-leap, arms flailing, not the clean vault of a man who wanted to go, but the fall of someone shoved. Others claimed the same as the hours passed. A man said he had glimpsed movement from the corner of his eye, something taller, darker, leaning against him in the instant before the water swallowed him. Another swore he heard two voices, one calling in panic, the other too low to catch, a growl carried off by the wind. The ship's officers dismissed it all, their tones sharp, commanding, as they told us grief warped memory, that panic played tricks, but their faces betrayed them. I watched the way one officer's hands tightened on the railing as he repeated the official line, his knuckles white. He did not believe his own words. That night, as I stood again on the deck, staring into the black water, I tried to remember the moment as clearly as I could. I had seen the man leap, yes, but had I seen what came before? My mind flickered back to it, the blur of motion, the strange twist of his body, the way his arms had not stretched forward in a dive, but flailed outward, clutching at air. The memory sickened me. Passengers drifted near me, their conversations low, eyes darting toward the rail as though expecting another body to tumble into the sea. They spoke of curses, of the ship carrying more than people, of something that followed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to press its hands into flesh. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, carrying the salt sting of the ocean. I leaned into the rail, staring at the churned water below, and for the briefest instant, I thought I saw it. Another shape in the reflection. Not mine, not human. Standing close behind me, hands raised. My heart lurched, and I spun around. Nothing. Only the empty deck stretching long and quiet. But my skin burned where I had felt it. That pressure between my shoulders, the phantom weight of unseen hands. And in that moment, I understood the whispers were not madness. He had not leapt alone. Something had wanted him gone. And maybe it was not finished. That night the sea was calm, the kind of stillness that feels staged, unnatural. The ship drifted through it like a great animal holding its breath. I tried to sleep, but the whispers from the day followed me into the dark. Stories of shadows and hands pressing against backs. Every creak of the hull set my nerves on edge. Every groan of metal felt like the ship speaking in a language I wasn't meant to understand. It was just past midnight when I heard it. The sound of water moving just beyond my cabin window. At first, I thought it was the usual slap of waves, the ocean brushing against steel. But then the rhythm took shape. Not random, not the aimless splash of the tide. This was measured, steady, deliberate. It was the sound of swimming. I froze in my bed, heart thundering as the realization crawled over me. Someone, or something, was in the water, moving in long, controlled strokes. The splashing kept perfect pace with the ship, never lagging, never surging ahead, as though it were pacing me. I crept to the window, every step a battle against the dread curling inside me. The glass was dark, streaked with salt, but I leaned close, straining to pierce the black beyond. The moonlight caught the surface in fleeting glimpses, silver flashing across waves, but nothing more. Still, the sound continued. A push of water, a pause, another push. It was impossible. The ship was moving far too fast for anyone to keep up, yet the rhythm never faltered. It grew louder, closer, until it felt as though whatever swam there pressed its face just beneath the surface of the glass. I thought of the man from that night, the one who had gone overboard without a trace. The ocean had never given him back. No body, no cry, no sign. And now, outside my cabin, something kept pace with us, each stroke a reminder that he was not gone, not completely. I stepped back from the window, chest tight, unable to look any longer. Still the sound continued, dragging through the water with unnatural calm, like an endless pursuit. And then, just as my breath caught in a sob, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The absence of sound pressed in thick, like the sea itself was listening for me. I stood frozen, every hair on my body raised, praying for the normal slap of waves to return. Instead, 3 heavy knocks thudded against the hull beneath my window. Slow, hollow, purposeful. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. Trembling in the dark, the sea had claimed the man. Yes, but he was not resting at the bottom. He was here, swimming alongside, keeping pace with us, waiting for someone else to join him in the water's cold embrace. I did not sleep after the knocks. I sat on the floor of my cabin, every light on, the curtains drawn, my breath shallow in the stale air. But fear has a way of feeding itself, growing restless if left unfed. At some point, though my body screamed against it, I rose to the window. I told myself I would glance only once, prove there was nothing, and then retreat. The glass was cold beneath my fingertips as I pulled the curtain aside. At first, I saw only the black churn of water, waves rolling like mussels beneath stretched skin. The ship's lights caught the surface in fractured flashes, sharp glints scattered across the endless dark. I almost allowed myself relief. Almost. Then it rose. At first, just a ripple, a disturbance in the smooth sway of the ocean. Then pale flesh broke the surface, water streaming from hair plastered flat against a skull. A face emerged, lifting higher, framed in the light, eyes wide, unblinking, skin ghostly under the reflection. It was him, the man who had gone overboard. He stared directly at me. His gaze did not drift or flicker with the waves. It locked onto mine with an intensity that froze my blood. His pupils were enormous, swallowing almost the entire eye. But the whites around them glowed faintly, catching the ship's lights like glass. He was too close, impossibly close. As though the sea had lifted him to meet my stare, his mouth began to open, slowly, agonizingly, until it stretched wider than it should have, lips tearing against teeth. Water poured from the opening, streaming down his chin, but no sound came. No scream, no cry, only silence. A silence deeper than any I had ever known, as if the sea itself had stolen his voice. I pressed back from the glass, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." But my eyes would not release him. His mouth gaped wider still, the jaw straining, splitting, until it was little more than a hollow void spilling seawater in streams. Still he stared. Still he said nothing. The ship shuddered beneath me, a vibration rolling through the steel, and the water outside rippled violently. In an instant, the face was gone, dragged back beneath the surface as though a hand had yanked him down. The waves smoothed over, calm, empty, erasing him once more. But I know what I saw. I know the sea does not keep silence on its own. It holds it, cradles it, uses it. And the man overboard has not left us. He swims beside us still, mute and screaming in the depths, waiting for another face to press against the glass. On that final night, as I drew the curtain shut with trembling hands, I realized the ocean did not just take him. It made him part of itself. And now it waits for the rest of us, patient, endless, and hungry. He was the kind of man most passengers would overlook. Quiet, always moving quickly, head bowed as he carried trays or changed linens. But I noticed him one evening when the lounge had thinned and the ship swayed softly under the moon. His hands trembled as he wiped a table already clean, and his eyes, when they lifted to mine, carried a weight I could not ignore. I struck up conversation, half expecting the practiced politeness of someone paid to serve. Instead, he sighed, a sound pulled from the deepest part of him, and leaned closer. His voice was low, frayed at the edges, but once he began, it seemed he could not stop. He told me about the ship's other side, the one not in brochures or safety drills. Stories of passengers who vanished in the night, their cabins left as though they had stepped out for a walk and never returned. Bags untouched, shoes still at the foot of the bed, sometimes even a glass of water half drunk on the nightstand, condensation still clinging to it as if they had only just put it down. He said the crew always had an explanation ready. Man overboard, a secret illness, a quiet removal at the next port. The passengers accepted it because they wanted to. But the truth was that the sea took people here, in ways no one could explain. Some left their cabins smiling, some whispering about voices in the hall, and some simply ceased to be, gone between one moment and the next. His eyes darted to the corners of the lounge as he spoke, as though expecting someone, or something, to be listening. His words quickened, the confession spilling out with urgency. He said he had worked this ship too long, seen too many vanish, and that he was tired of carrying the silence. When I asked him why he stayed, why he did not leave the sea behind, he looked at me with a hollow kind of resignation. "Where else can I go?" he whispered. "The sea remembers. It follows." For a moment his mask slipped, and I saw what was really in his eyes. Fear. A deep, bone-carved terror that no contract or paycheck could explain away. He spoke like a man already haunted, already halfway gone. Before he left, he thanked me. Not for listening, but for being there. Like my presence had given him a moment of release. He smiled, faint and brittle, and said it was good to talk before walking quickly away, shoulders hunched as though carrying a weight no one else could see. That night, long after the lounge emptied, I could not shake his words. The ship seemed too quiet, the corridors too long, the walls too thin. And for the first time since boarding, I wondered what else drifted with us across the endless black water, and how many stories like his had already been swallowed whole. It was well past midnight when the knock came. Soft at first, then sharper, insistent, cutting through the thin walls of my cabin. I hesitated before opening it, expecting another passenger, drunk or lost. But it was him, the steward. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes wide, glinting with a restless urgency. He looked different than before. Stripped of the polite distance he wore in public, he leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to show you something," he said, glancing down the hall as though afraid someone might hear. "But it has to be now. Below deck." Before I could question him, he was already walking, his steps quick, shoulders tense, every movement heavy with dread. Against all reason, I followed. Curiosity, or maybe fear of being left alone after hearing his stories, pulled me along. We moved past the passenger decks, deeper into the ship's belly. He led me through narrow service corridors I had never known existed, the kind not meant for guests. The walls here were bare metal, sweat slick with condensation, pipes groaning softly above our heads. The air was thick, damp, heavy with the scent of oil and salt. Every turn took us farther from the polished surfaces and warm lights of the upper decks, into a labyrinth that seemed designed to disorient. The halls narrowed until I had to brush against the walls to pass. Overhead, the lights flickered in patches, leaving stretches of shadow where the steward moved quickly, never looking back to see if I kept pace. I did. My heart pounded, my breath uneven. The sound of my footsteps too loud against the metal floor. We passed door after door, some unmarked, others sealed with rusting locks. He avoided them all, leading me deeper still. At one point, we descended a stairwell, and the air grew colder. The hum of the engine seemed to fade, replaced by a hollow silence that pressed against my ears. Finally, he stopped before a narrow hatch. He placed his hand against the steel as if steadying himself, his shoulders trembling. He turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw real fear etched across his face. Not just unease, but terror, raw, consuming. "You have to see," he whispered. "You'll understand why I can't sleep, why I can't leave this ship. You'll see what happens to them." His hand hovered at the latch, shaking, reluctant to pull it. For a long moment he stood there, trapped between the urge to reveal and the instinct to flee. And then, from somewhere deep beyond that hatch, came a sound. It was faint, but clear. A whisper. Not of one voice, but many, tangled together, rising like breath through steel. My stomach turned cold, and I saw the steward's eyes widen further. He hadn't brought me here to convince me. He had brought me because he was too afraid to face it alone. The hatch groaned when he forced it open, the hinges crying out like something long unused. A blast of air rolled over us, thick, stale, heavy with the taste of rust. I hesitated on the threshold, but he pressed forward, shoulders squared, though his hands still shook. I followed close behind, the metal door sealing shut with a hollow clang that echoed down the passage like a warning. The corridor beyond was tighter than the service halls we had already passed. The walls pressed in, damp and sweating, leaving little room to breathe. My shoulders brushed against them as I walked, and every touch left my skin clammy. Overhead, the lights were fewer, weaker, leaving long stretches of gloom where the floor seemed to vanish under my feet. The hum of machinery deepened here, a low vibration that rattled in my chest and swallowed all other sound. It wasn't the steady rhythm of engines I had grown used to on this voyage. This was irregular, layered, almost alive, a pulse that felt wrong, as if the ship itself were breathing. I tried to call out to him, to ask where we were going, but my voice fell dead in the air, consumed before it could carry. We kept moving, deeper still, the air growing hotter and sourer with every step. My head swam, vision blurring at the edges, lungs straining as though each breath cost something I did not have. I reached out, my hand brushing the back of his jacket to steady myself, to assure myself that he was still there. And then, he wasn't. It happened between one step and the next. My hand stretched forward, touched only air. The narrow corridor stretched ahead of me, empty. No footsteps, no shadow, no sound of movement. He was gone. Panic surged through me. I stumbled forward, my voice breaking free in a shout that was devoured instantly by the hum. The sound clung to me, pressing from every angle, vibrating in my teeth, drowning me in its endless rhythm. I turned back, expecting to see him retreating, but the passage behind was just as empty, its walls closing like a throat. I rushed ahead blindly, my breath ragged. But no matter how far I moved, the hall remained the same, tight, stifling, endless. My calls for him grew weaker, each one snatched and buried in the machinery's roar. Somewhere ahead, I thought I glimpsed movement, a flicker of shadow slipping just around a corner. I chased it, certain it was him. But when I rounded the bend, there was only more corridor, the walls damp and gleaming like flesh. I stopped then, chest heaving, the weight of silence pressing so heavy it was hard to think. He had vanished as if the ship itself had swallowed him, claimed him, pulled him into its bones. And as I stood alone in that suffocating dark, I realized I was not just lost, I was next. I forced myself forward, panic spurring me faster than reason. My palms dragged along the wet walls, searching for any seam, any difference, anything that would tell me I was moving deeper or nearer to an end. but every step brought me to the same narrow corridor, the same sweating steel, the same weak lights buzzing overhead. The air clung thick in my lungs, growing harder to swallow, as if the passage itself wanted me to choke on it. I turned a corner, my pulse hammering. Relief surged for a heartbeat. This must be the way out. But when my eyes adjusted, I froze. The corridor ahead was the same stains streaking the walls, the same flickering bulb, the same narrowness that pressed against my ribs. I had walked into a circle that was not supposed to exist. I spun back the way I had come, nearly running this time. My breath came loud and ragged, but the hum of the machinery drowned even that, filling the air with its constant vibration. Every corner turned only delivered me back to where I had begun. Again and again, like a cruel loop designed to strip me of time and direction. And then I heard it. A voice, faint, broken, carried through the metal as if the walls themselves whispered. My name. Stretched long, fragile, drawn out as though spoken through water. I froze, my blood running cold, and the hair on my arms rose as the sound pressed close against my ear. It was him, the steward, his voice calling to me from somewhere deep inside the ship, further than the halls allowed. I stumbled forward, chasing it, calling back into the hum. My voice cracked, desperate, begging him to answer again. And he did. Though now it came from the opposite direction, behind me, soft and pleading, urging me to follow. I turned and ran back, but the loop swallowed me once more. Each turn of the corridor returned me to the same flickering bulb, the same damp walls closing tighter, the air rank with rust and something sweeter, rotting. His voice never stopped. Always, a step ahead or a step behind, always whispering my name. Sometimes it sounded like a plea, weak and strained. Sometimes it bent into laughter, hollow and wrong, bouncing too long between the walls. Sweat stung my eyes, my hands trembled. Yet I could not stop chasing him. Each echo promised he was just around the next bend. Each whisper dragged me deeper into the loop. But no matter how many times I turned, there was no end. Only my name, twisting softer, sharper, closer. At last I slowed, breath ragged, chest aching. My voice cracked into silence, swallowed whole by the machinery's hum. And in the stillness that followed, I knew the truth. The voice was not leading me to him. It was leading me away from myself. When dawn came, I stumbled back into the world of passengers and polished decks, though I could not recall how I escaped the looping halls. My body ached as if I had been walking for hours, my throat raw from shouting a name I was no longer sure of. The sunlight streaming through the wide glass windows felt wrong, too clean, too bright, as though it did not belong to the same place I had wandered the night before. I searched for him immediately. I asked other stewards, pressing them with descriptions, the way his hands trembled when he poured water, the hollow look in his eyes when he spoke of the vanishings, the exact uniform he wore. But each one only blinked at me, their polite smiles too practiced, their eyes slipping away as if I had said something dangerous. Finally, I demanded to see the roster, the daily list pinned up in a corridor behind the dining hall. My heart pounded as I scanned the names, certain I would find him. But there was nothing, no trace. His name was not there. There were no gaps, no omissions. It was as if he had never existed at all. I returned twice more, later that day and the next, desperate to prove it to myself. Each time, the name stared back, complete and unchanged. And yet, I could still remember his voice in the lounge, his hand shaking as he knocked at my door, his face pale in the half-light of the service corridor. Those memories pressed against the silence like bruises that would not fade. When I cornered a guard, begging for answers, he gave a sharp laugh, though his eyes betrayed him. "Crew come and go," he said, dismissing me with a wave. "Maybe you imagined him." His tone was mocking, but I saw the way his hand tightened on the railing, the way he refused to meet my gaze. That night, I walked the decks alone, replaying every detail. I tried to remember if I had ever seen anyone else speak to him, if there had been another witness to prove he was real. The more I thought, the more the edges of him blurred, as though my mind itself had begun to conspire against me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know the way the walls whispered my name and the way his voice had carried through them, broken and wrong. The sea has its own memory, one that does not leave paper, trails, or written rosters. It takes names, faces, entire lives, and pulls them into its silence. The others may deny him, may erase him, but I will never forget the hollow look in his eyes when he said the sea follows. Because when I walk the quieter halls at night, I still hear it. The whisper of footsteps pacing just behind me, the faint knock at my cabin door, the voice of a man who never existed. She was the kind of bride who seemed to glow from the inside out, her laughter bubbling over like champagne, her eyes alight with the kind of joy only the very young still believe will last forever. He never let go of her hand, not once. Not even when she leaned too far over the rail to wave at the gulls swooping in the ship's wake. They were radiant, the kind of couple strangers paused to watch. Because for a moment, it almost made you believe love could protect against anything. I met them on the second night of the voyage, when the sun dipped low and the air turned cool, when the deck lights flickered to life like stars in waiting. They introduced themselves easily, without hesitation, their voices warm, their smiles wide. She wore white still, a simple dress that caught the breeze and carried it like a ghost trailing behind her. He looked at her as if the world began and ended with her presence. They told me they had married just days before, rushing straight from the ceremony to the ship, eager to outrun the world they had left behind. Their words tumbled over each other. Stories of the wedding, the families who cried, the vows spoken so fast they nearly forgot the rings. She laughed at it all, touching her husband's arm, her affection spilling over with every glance. There was something about her laughter that lingered with me. It was bright, yes, but beneath it ran a thread of nervousness, like a candle flickering in a draught. I thought at first it was only the sea, the way it unsettled even the strongest of stomachs. But when the wind quieted and the night stretched soft and still, she still laughed too quickly, too sharply, as though trying to drown out something only she could hear. Her husband never seemed to notice, or maybe he noticed too much, clinging tighter each time her laughter rose. He was devoted. That much was clear, his arm always around her, his gaze never straying. But sometimes, when she looked out across the endless black of the ocean, her eyes clouded, her smile faltered. And in those brief silences, before she caught herself and laughed again, there was fear. Still, that night they looked untouchable. She leaned against him, whispering something in his ear that made him blush and shake his head. He kissed her hair, and she closed her eyes, holding him as if she were already afraid of losing him. I left them at the rail, their silhouettes etched against the glittering dark. They waved as I turned away, their voices carrying faintly on the wind, bright and alive. Yet even then, as their laughter followed me, down the corridor, I could not shake the chill that clung to it, the feeling that the sea itself was listening too closely, waiting for its moment to answer back. It was the kind of sound that pulls you out of half sleep like a hook through the chest. fists slamming against doors, frantic voices in the hall. I staggered out, still heavy with drowsiness, and saw him there. The husband. His face was pale, slick with sweat, eyes wide and bloodshot, his hands raw from pounding. He was screaming her name, his voice breaking, shouting that she was gone. Passengers spilled into the corridor, confusion rippling from door to door. But he pushed through them, wild, desperate. She was just here, he kept repeating. She was in bed. I turned over and she was gone. His words tumbled over each other, broken by sobs. He begged us to help, begged anyone to believe him. Crew members arrived, trying to calm him, to push the crowd back. He fought them at first, but then he seized one by the arm, dragging him toward his cabin. I followed with the others, compelled by something colder than curiosity. The door to their room hung half open, splintered where it had been forced in his panic. Inside, the air felt wrong, charged, unsettled, as if the room itself remembered violence. The bedclothes were ripped, tangled, one pillow split open so that feathers drifted across the carpet like snow. On the nightstand, a perfume bottle lay shattered, its scent thick and cloying in the air, mingling with something sharper, metallic. Her shoes were still lined neatly by the wall. Her bag sat on the chair, unopened. The kind of details that whispered she had never planned to leave. He fell to his knees, tearing at the sheets, calling her name as though she might answer from beneath them. His hands came up trembling, streaked faintly with red. Gasps rippled through the passengers pressed at the door. Someone whispered blood. Someone else whispered murder. The crew tried to restore order, tried to usher us out, but their voices faltered as they looked around the cabin. One steward bent to the carpet, touching a smear of crimson no bigger than a coin. He stood quickly, his face pale, eyes darting toward the husband, as though already deciding what story would be told. The husband's wails filled the room, raw and animal, echoing off the narrow walls until it felt unbearable. He swore he had woken to find her beside him, swore he had turned for only a moment, and that when he rolled back, she was gone. He swore someone had taken her. But the room told a different story, one without witnesses, one stitched together from torn sheets and perfume sharp in the air. When they finally dragged him out, still screaming, still begging, I lingered at the doorway, staring into the wreckage of their happiness. And in the silence that followed, I thought I heard something faint, a sound that did not belong. A laugh, fragile, far away, rising from somewhere the walls should not lead. The ship slowed to a crawl before the sun had even risen, the engines groaning in protest, as if they too disliked being silenced. Word spread quickly through the decks. The authorities would be meeting us at sea, flown in by helicopter to investigate the bride's disappearance. By then, every passenger knew, and the entire ship hummed with the restless tension of people trapped together with a mystery they could not escape. The husband sat apart in the lounge, his head in his hands, surrounded by crew who hovered not with sympathy, but with suspicion. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes swollen from crying, his voice hoarse from screaming through the night. He told anyone who would listen the same story. She had been beside him, warm, breathing. And then, she was gone. He never stopped insisting she had not left willingly. When the investigators arrived, they moved quickly, their presence sharp and clinical against the haze of disbelief clinging to us. They sealed the cabin first, forcing everyone back as they photographed the torn sheets, the shattered perfume bottle, the faint smear of blood on the carpet. Passengers crowded the corridor, whispering, their voices thin and eager, searching for answers the professionals did not provide. The captain himself appeared then, his face stern but weary, the lines around his mouth deeper than they had been yesterday. He promised cooperation, transparency, safety. But behind his eyes was something else. Resignation, as though he had seen this before. Hours passed. We were told to remain calm, to wait. But the air on board grew heavier with every moment. Rumors blossomed like mold. She had jumped. She had been murdered. She had been stolen by someone hiding in the service corridors. Yet none of it held. By the second day, the announcement came. Flat and unyielding. The security cameras had been checked, frame by frame. The entire hallway outside their cabin was visible through the night. Not once did she appear. Not once did anyone enter or leave. It was impossible. She had gone to bed. She had been seen by her husband. And then, nothing. She simply ceased to exist. The passengers recoiled at the news. Some shook their heads, muttering disbelief. Others grew angry, demanding explanations that never came. But the husband's reaction was worse. He broke into wild sobs, slamming his fists against the table, screaming that they were lying, that the cameras had been tampered with. He clawed at his own hair until the crew dragged him away, his voice raw with her name echoing through the halls. That night, the ship pressed onward, engines stirring the Black Sea back into motion. But the air never lightened. The cabin remained sealed, the chains heavy across its door. And as I lay in my bed, restless, unable to close my eyes, I swore I smelled it. The faint, cloying sweetness of perfume drifting through the vents, curling soft as breath against my skin. It lingered long into the night, though no one else admitted to noticing. A scent from a woman who no longer existed. Sleep did not come easy that night. The ship rocked gently, but it was not soothing. It was restless, like something shifting beneath the surface, waiting. The corridors had gone quiet, though whispers still traveled from cabin to cabin, low as the breath of ghosts. I lay awake, thinking of the bride's laughter, of the way perfume had clung in the air of her cabin long after she had vanished. It seemed impossible to believe she was simply gone. Then, near midnight, a scream split the silence. It was raw, desperate, tearing through the walls like a blade. I rushed into the hall with others, doors flinging open up and down the corridor. It was him, the husband. They dragged us back as crew forced their way into his cabin. His cries continued, jagged and broken, and I caught words between the sobs. "She's here," he shrieked. "She's lying here." His voice cracked, rising in pitch, hysteria chewing through every syllable. From the doorway, I glimpsed the scene. He was thrashing in bed, sheets twisted around him, his face pale with terror. He clawed at the mattress, shouting that he could feel her weight pressed against him, her body curled beside his. He sobbed that her hair was wet, strands clinging to his cheek, that her skin was ice against his. His arms flailed wildly, as if to shove something away, something we could not see. Then his voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and chilling. He swore she was speaking to him, her lips brushing his ear in the dark. The words spilled from him in broken gasps. She was asking why he had left her, why he hadn't saved her, why he had let the sea take her. The crew fought to restrain him, but he kicked and writhed, howling that she was still there, that she was laughing now, her voice hollow, close, wrapping around him like chains. His eyes rolled wild, locked on something just above him, something none of us could see. I will never forget the sound of his scream then, long and guttural, as though something inside him tore loose. He stared into the corner of the room, pointing with trembling hands, swearing she was standing there, her veil dripping water onto the floor, her face pale and broken. By the time they dragged him out, His voice was nearly gone, his body trembling, his eyes wide and hollow. They carried him past us, his head jerking from side to side as though he still heard her whispering in the air. The cabin door slammed shut, but I could not unhear what he had shouted in those moments of terror. That she had returned, not alive, not gone, but caught between. And as I stood in the corridor long after the others had returned to their rooms, I swore I felt it too. A chill pressing close against my own skin, as though someone unseen had slipped into my bed as well. The final night fell heavy and strange. The sea wrapped in a fog so dense, the lights of the ship bled into it and dissolved. Passengers moved softly, their voices low, as if even they felt the voyage nearing some unseen edge. I wandered the deck alone, the mist curling cold against my skin, the waves below muffled into silence. It was then I saw them. At first, only a shadow at the far end of the deck, slow and unhurried, moving with a purpose no one else shared. As I drew closer, the shape resolved into him, the husband. His posture was calm, his steps steady, so different from the frantic, broken man who had screamed her name for nights on end. His face was turned slightly toward the figure beside him, and though the fog swallowed details, I knew at once who it was. She walked hand in hand with him, the bride who had vanished. Her gown trailed against the deck, soaked and clinging, leaving a faint glisten of wetness that shimmered before fading into nothing. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her hair dark and slick, strands plastered to her face as though she had only just emerged from the water. But her eyes burned with a softness that chilled me more than grief. They did not speak. They did not need to. Each step carried them closer to the ship's edge, their fingers locked together as though they had never been parted. His face bore no fear, no hesitation, only the kind of devotion that looks like surrender. She led him gently, almost tenderly, her lips curved in the faintest smile, though her expression held none of the laughter I remembered. I tried to call out, but the mist pressed the sound back into my throat, muffling it before it could reach them. My body would not move, frozen by the certainty that this was not a moment I was meant to interrupt. I could only watch as they reached the rail, as he turned to her one last time, his hand tightening around hers. Together, they climbed, not hurried, not desperate, calm, united, as though stepping into a vow renewed. The fog wrapped thick around them as their bodies tilted forward, vanishing over the edge with the gentleness of falling into sleep. I ran then, finally breaking free. But by the time I reached the rail, there was nothing. No splash, no ripple. Only mist curling over the dark waves, unbroken, silent. The sea had taken them both, bound them together in its endless hunger. And as I stood there, breath shallow, the fog pressed close around me, heavy with the faintest trace of perfume. Sweet, cloying, impossible to mistake. It lingered long after they were gone, as if reminding me that the sea keeps what it chooses, and sometimes love itself is only another way to drown. The sun was sharp that morning, glaring off the white steel of the ship as crew herded us toward the lifeboat stations for the mandatory muster drill. Passengers grumbled, clutching drinks, shielding their eyes, their voices loud with impatience. I stood among them, listening half-heartedly to the safety instructions, watching life vests being demonstrated, when something caught my eye. At the far end of the deck, seated in a perfect row along the rail, was a group of passengers who did not belong. They were dressed in clothing that looked wrong for the year. Men in stiff suits with high collars, women in long dresses with lace that fluttered in the breeze, their skirts far too heavy for the heat. A little boy clutched a wooden toy horse, its paint peeling, its edges worn. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Their faces were pale, drained of color, their eyes fixed straight ahead, as if the sea itself held them captive. I blinked hard, expecting them to vanish with the motion. But when my vision cleared, they remained. Each detail sharp, every fold of fabric catching the sun. My stomach tightened as I glanced around, waiting for someone else to notice. But the other passengers laughed, complained, checked their phones, utterly blind to the silent row at the edge of the drill. The crew member's voice droned on about emergency exits, but his words faded beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. The pale figures sat perfectly still, too still, as though time did not touch them. Their skin gleamed faintly in the light, a waxy sheen that made them seem both solid and not. I tried to step closer, pushing through the crowd, but each time I moved, someone blocked my way, distracted, shifting, laughing, oblivious. My view wavered, yet I never lost sight of them. Their eyes, too many of them at once, shifted in unison. Not toward the crew, not toward the drills, but toward me. A cold prickle ran the length of my spine. Their stares locked on me, heavy and unyielding, as though recognizing that I alone had pierced the veil that separated them from the living. The boy clutched his toy tighter, his lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Only silence pressed thick against my ears. Then, without warning, the horn of the ship bellowed, long and deafening. Passengers flinched, hands over their ears. I did the same, my gaze breaking for only a moment. And when the echo died, the row was gone. Empty chairs, bare deck, nothing but sunlight glaring off steel. The drill continued as though nothing had happened, the crowd dispersing in chatter and relief. But my hands would not stop shaking, because I knew what I had seen. I knew the silence of those pale passengers was heavier than any horn, heavier than any rule of safety. And I knew, deep down, that a muster drill is meant for the living. But sometimes, the dead still answer roll call. The memory of them stayed with me long after the drill ended, sharper than the blare of the horn, sharper than the sunlight off the waves. I could still see their pale faces, the stiff lace of the women's dresses, the boy's fingers clenched around his wooden horse. They had not moved like living people do. They had watched me, and only me. That evening, when the ship had settled back into its rhythm of laughter, clinking glasses, and music drifting from the lounge, I sought out one of the crew. He stood by the rail, clipboard in hand, ticking off names with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 100 times. I asked him carefully if anyone had been unaccounted for during the drill. He looked at me with mild annoyance, then smiled thinly. Rehearsed. Every passenger was present, sir. Everyone accounted for. I pressed. I told him I'd seen a group that seemed apart from the others, strangely dressed, pale, silent. His pen froze above the paper, just for a breath. Then he gave a little laugh that did not reach his eyes. I think the heat may have gotten to you. Happens often on these decks during drills. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Unsatisfied, I asked another crew member later that night, a woman arranging deck chairs. She gave me the same answer, the same smile, too quick, too shallow. Everyone accounted for, she repeated. And though her lips moved easily, her gaze darted toward the darkening horizon, as if afraid of something she could not name. I stopped asking after the third. His denial had been sharper, tinged with warning. Don't spread stories, he muttered under his breath, though his face was still plastered with a professional calm. It frightens the guests. best not to mention things you think you saw. Things I think I saw. But I knew the truth of what had happened. The way their eyes had moved in perfect unison, locking on mine. The way the boy's lips had parted, his silence heavier than a scream. That was not the heat. That was not a trick of the light. The rest of the night I lingered on deck, watching passengers stroll past in shorts and sundresses, drinks glowing in their hands under string lights. None of them looked like the silent row I had seen. None of them carried that air of waiting, of belonging to another time. Yet the more I replayed it, the more I realized what gnawed at me most. The crew's smiles had not been dismissive. They had been defensive, which meant the pale figures had been seen before. And perhaps, if I stayed long enough, I would see them again, sitting in neat rows, waiting patiently for a drill the living believed was theirs alone. The night was warm but restless. The sea rolling gently beneath the hull, the air heavy with the kind of quiet that makes every sound sharp. I walked the upper deck to clear my head, the laughter and music of the lounge still echoing faintly behind me. The lifeboats hung above in their cradles, pale in the moonlight, each one a promise of safety that felt suddenly thin and fragile. And that was when I saw them again. They stood in line beneath the lifeboats, silent as shadows. A row of passengers waiting with the same unnatural stillness I had seen at the drill. The same heavy suits and lace dresses, their hems brushing the deck as if dampened by unseen water. The boy still clutched his wooden horse, his small hand wrapped so tightly around it that the toy's head was bent backward, splintered. They were not seated now. They were standing, arranged in a perfect line, facing forward as though waiting for instruction. The moon struck their faces pale, their eyes hollow pits that caught no light. Not one blinked, not one shifted. I froze, my breath shallow, staring at them from the shadows near the rail. My mind screamed to move, to step back, to retreat, but my legs would not obey. I watched them in silence, certain if I made the smallest sound, they would all turn at once. And then, slowly, they did. Every head tilted in unison, every gaze swinging to meet mine with the smooth precision of something rehearsed. The hollowness of their eyes burned through me, not absence, but depth, as if staring too long might drag me down into whatever waited inside them. The boy's lips parted again, his toy dangling limply now, his jaw trembling. But no sound came, only the faint creak of the lifeboats swaying above. Behind him, one of the women raised her hand as though to wave, her fingers dripping dark trails that left no mark on the deck. I staggered backward, my heart beat thunderous in my ears. The line remained, their faces pale and watching, their silence suffocating. My mind clawed for explanation, reenactment, performance, anything to make them human. But deep down, I knew no staged play could account for the way their eyes pinned me, the way their presence pulled the air cold and damp into my lungs. I blinked hard, my vision swimming, and when it cleared, the line was gone. Empty deck, lifeboats silent, unmoving. The only sound was the steady slap of waves against steel. I stood there long after, the image of them etched into me. The hollowness of their gaze burned deep. Because what I saw was not the living. It was a roll call of the lost, gathered again in the place they had been abandoned, waiting for a drill that had never saved them. And for the first time since boarding, I understood. This ship carried more than passengers. It carried the memory of every soul the sea had swallowed, and some of them still marched to muster. The next morning, I carried the weight of their hollow eyes like a stone pressing against my ribs. Every smile from a passing passenger, every laugh rising from the poolside bar, felt false, fragile. I needed answers, something real, something tangible to explain the silent row of figures I had seen not once, but twice. In the ship's library, tucked away from the noise, I found stacks of maritime records, bound in leather and dust, their pages brittle with age. Most passengers never touched them. They came for novels, light distractions, not history carved out of tragedy. But I dug through them with trembling hands, my heart pounding with the certainty that the ship itself wanted me to find the truth. And there it was. Decades ago, this very vessel had carried a full load of passengers across the Atlantic when disaster struck. A fire broke out deep in the galley during the dead of night, spreading faster than alarms could sound. Thick black smoke rolled through the lower decks, swallowing entire hallways before anyone could escape. Crew shouted, passengers screamed, chaos boiled in the dark. The records told of attempts to lower lifeboats, of passengers gathered for muster, even as the flames licked at the deck. Dozens pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the very lifeboats I had walked past the night before, waiting for salvation that never came. The fire roared too hot, too fast. The boats never dropped. The casualty list stretched across the page like a wound. Men, women, children. The boy with the wooden horse, his name etched there in faded ink. His family beside him, their lives ended in smoke and flame, their bodies never recovered from the sea. I sat back, my hands shaking so hard, the paper rattled. The figures I had seen were not random, not hallucination. They were the remnants of that night, bound to the very place where they had gathered in terror, still waiting for a rescue that never arrived. Suddenly, the air in the library felt thick with heat, the faint smell of char and smoke curling at the edge of my senses. My throat tightened, my lungs burned as though remembering flames I had never breathed. I closed the book and shoved it back onto the shelf, unable to look at the names any longer. That night, when I walked past the lifeboats again, I did not look up. I did not need to. I could feel them there, standing in their line, waiting, patient, endless. The sea had not forgotten them. The ship had not forgotten them. And now neither could I. Because once you know the story, once you learn their names, you realize the muster drill is not for the living at all. It is for them, those pale, hollow-eyed passengers who never boarded the lifeboats, who still rise for roll call decade after decade, bound to a safety that never came. The final night came cloaked in an unnatural stillness. The sea lay flat and glassy beneath the moon, not a ripple daring to break its surface. The air was warm, steady, without wind. Yet as I walked the deck, I heard the unmistakable sound of wood groaning, ropes tightening, metal hooks straining. The lifeboats. I froze beneath them, staring up at their heavy frames. They creaked and swayed gently in their cradles, as though the ship were caught in a storm. Though the sea itself slept motionless around us, my breath caught in my throat. I knew then that this was not the weather's doing. It was theirs. The sound grew louder, the ropes twisting, the hulls rocking in place. The shadows beneath the boats deepened, thick as smoke, and the air turned cold against my skin. My feet rooted to the spot, unwilling yet unable to flee. And then, between the swings of the lifeboats, I saw them. Faces, pale, upturned, waiting. They filled the shadows in a perfect line, the same passengers I had seen before, their hollow eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Their clothes hung heavy, dripping, though no water touched, the deck. The boy's wooden horse dangled from his hand, its head cracked further, its body swollen with imagined seawater. The women clutched each other, lips trembling but voiceless. The men stood rigid, jaws clenched, eyes empty. All of them stared upward, their gaze fixed on me with the weight of decades. They had been waiting so long, for ropes to drop, for safety to come, for the sea to show mercy. None of it had arrived. And now, in the silence of that final night, they looked at me as if demanding an answer I could not give. The lifeboats rattled harder, their chains scraping like teeth on steel. For one terrible moment, I thought they would break free, crash down upon the deck, unleashing the weight of every lost soul bound to them. My body shook, every instinct screaming to run, yet I remained, locked by their gaze. The boy lifted his head slowly, his lips parting as though he might finally speak. The wind stirred just once, carrying the faintest whisper across the deck, thin, fragile, almost lost in the groan of the boats. I could not catch the word, but I felt it inside me, burrowing deep, cold as ash. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the swaying stopped. The ropes stilled, the lifeboats hung silent, the deck returned to calm. The sea rolled beneath us, placid, empty. I stumbled back, my chest heaving, the image of those pale faces burned into me. They were not gone. They never would be. They would always be waiting, locked in their endless drill, rising again and again with every voyage, their hollow eyes searching the living for salvation that will never come. And I knew, as I fled the deck, that one night soon they would stop waiting. One night, the lifeboats would finally lower, and it would not be for us. The ship had grown quiet past midnight. The chatter of bars and lounges dimmed to a few muffled echoes behind closed doors. I wandered the upper decks alone, the air cool, the sea stretching endless and black on all sides. The lights here were sparse. Their glow faded, leaving long corridors of shadow broken only by the silver wash of the moon. That was when I found the pool. It sat at the center of the deck, vast and still, a rectangle of darkness framed by pale tiles. The lights beneath the water had been switched off, and without them, the surface was mirror flat, reflecting nothing but the hard glare of the moon. It didn't shimmer like water should. It absorbed light instead, turning liquid into ink. A black sheet spread taut and waiting. No one else was there. The lounge chairs stood empty, neatly aligned like rows of silent witnesses. The air carried no sound but the soft thrum of the engines far below, steady, constant, like the beat of some vast heart. Yet the longer I stared at the pool, the more certain I became that it was not empty. I leaned closer, my reflection faint on the surface, warped and fragile. The water seemed too dark, too deep, as though it did not belong to the ship at all, but opened instead into some greater abyss. A ripple stirred then, though no wind touched me, no movement disturbed the deck. Just a single pulse that spread across the pool and died. My breath hitched. Something about it felt deliberate. I stepped back, scanning the shadows, waiting for another passenger, a late-night wanderer like myself. But there was no one, only the rows of empty chairs, the silent deck, the ink-black water. The air grew colder, sharp against my skin. I shivered, though my body was dry. And for the briefest moment, I swore I smelled salt stronger than the sea, thick and briny, like water that had been trapped too long. I glanced down again, and my heart lurched. Shapes moved just beneath the surface. Not fish, not tricks of light, but outlines. Arms, legs, faces, drifting slowly as though suspended in the depths. They did not break the surface, did not breathe, but their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, turned upward toward me. I stumbled back, my breath ragged, my chest tightening. The water stilled once more, blank and black, swallowing the shapes without a trace. Only my reflection remained, pale and trembling, floating on the surface of the pool. I fled the deck then, refusing to look back, though I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes rising through the black water, following me, patient and endless. And long after I reached my cabin, I could still hear it in my head, the faint ripple of water lapping gently, as though something below had stirred and would not rest again. The next night, I told myself I would avoid the pool, that I had imagined it, that exhaustion and moonlight had twisted shadows into faces. Yet close to midnight, I found my steps leading me back, as though the ship itself guided me along the silent decks. The air was still, heavy with salt, the corridors empty of passengers. And then I heard it, splashing, the sharp slap of water breaking, the hollow echo of bodies diving beneath the surface. At first, I thought perhaps the crew had drained and refilled it, that someone had slipped in late despite the posted signs forbidding night swimming. But when I reached the open deck, the pool lay still, black as ever, its surface unbroken. The sound did not stop. Water churned, though no one swam. Ripples spread across the black mirror, moving in patterns that made no sense, as if arms and legs cut through beneath. My skin prickled as I leaned over the rail, searching for proof. But there was none. Only the noise, loud and bright, echoing against the silence of the deck. And then came laughter. Not the laughter of adults, not the low hum of drunken passengers, but high-pitched, sharp, the sound of children at play. It rang across the deck, bouncing off steel, though the rows of lounge chairs sat empty, though no figure moved in the shadows. A child's giggle rose above it all, clear and bright, but twisted at the edges, too close to the water's hollow slap. The sound turned my stomach, not with joy, but dread. It carried no warmth. It was brittle, like glass tapping against glass, like something imitating joy, but missing its heart. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the pool. The laughter grew louder, sharper, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once, weaving around me. I spun, expecting to see small figures darting between the chairs, but there was nothing. Only the stillness of the deck, the black water stirring with ripples that rose and fell without cause. Then the giggle came again, right at my ear this time, close enough that the hair on my neck bristled. I staggered back, nearly falling, my breath tearing from my chest. My gaze shot to the water, just as it calmed, smooth again, flat and waiting. The silence that followed pressed heavier than before. I stood trembling, the echo of that child's laughter still rattling in my head, and I knew I had not imagined it. Something was in that water, something that played at night with voices long since lost. I turned and fled the deck, my footsteps ringing too loud, chased not by sound, but by silence. But deep inside I knew the truth. The pool was not empty. It had never been empty. It was full of whatever the sea had taken, waiting for someone foolish enough to look too long into its depths. The pool drew me back again, though every part of me screamed against it. It was close to 1 a.m. when I found myself on the deck, the air unnaturally still, the ship creaking softly beneath my feet. The surface of the pool lay black and perfect, like a sheet of polished obsidian stretched across the deck. I stood at its edge, staring, waiting, my breath shallow in the silence. At first, nothing stirred. No ripples, no laughter, no splashing. Only my reflection hovered there, pale and unsteady, bending in the faint light. But the longer I stared, the more I felt it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing upward from the depths. The sense that I was not looking at water at all, but at a barrier between myself and something that hungered below. I leaned closer. My face hovered inches from the glassy surface. The air smelled thick with salt and rust, too strong for a pool meant for leisure. My hands trembled as I gripped the rail, drawn in despite every instinct that told me to flee. That was when the water broke. A hand rose, pale and bloated, dripping black water as it surged upward. Then another, fingers long and stiff, their nails cracked, reaching, clawing for me. The surface rippled violently as more pressed through, pale shapes writhing just beneath, struggling upward as though desperate to escape. I stumbled back with a cry, my heart hammering, nearly tripping over the chairs behind me. The hands grasped at the air where I had been, the water hissing as it closed around them again. For a moment, I thought they might pull themselves free, that I would see faces rise with them. But they sank, vanishing into the black, leaving only a restless ripple across the surface. My chest heaved, every breath jagged. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold myself upright. I stared at the pool, waiting for another surge, but the water had gone still once more, smooth as glass, as if nothing had disturbed it. My reflection wavered there again, pale and trembling, the only proof I had survived the moment. But I knew better. I had seen them. I had seen the dead reaching for me, trying to drag me into the depths where laughter and silence merged. And in their desperate grasp, I felt no malice, only hunger. A hunger that would not be sated until someone else slipped beneath the surface. I fled the deck, the echo of splashing chasing me through the corridors. Though when I looked back, the pool was calm and waiting once more, waiting for me, or for someone else foolish enough to lean too close. By morning, the pool was roped off. A bright yellow sign declared it closed for maintenance, the kind of simple explanation that passengers accepted with mild annoyance before drifting back to their breakfasts and lounge chairs. But I lingered at the railing, my eyes fixed on the drained shell below. The water was gone, leaving the pool exposed and naked under the harsh light. At first glance, it was ordinary, white tile, blue borders, the gleam of surfaces scrubbed too clean. But then I saw them, the scratches. They covered the bottom in jagged patterns, deep grooves gouged into the tile as though carved by desperate hands. Long trails that crossed and overlapped, spirals of violence etched into the surface. I could see where the nails had broken, where lines ended abruptly in cracked marks, where someone, or something, had clawed until there was nothing left to give. My stomach turned cold. No storm, no accident could have done this. These were human marks, the frantic scrabble of fingers fighting to climb free. A crew member noticed me staring and moved quickly to block my view, his smile strained. "Just wear and tear," he said too lightly, though his eyes darted toward the bottom with the same unease tightening my chest. I pressed him, asked how simple wear and tear could cut grooves that deep. His smile faltered, and he muttered something about repairs before ushering me away. But the image had already seared itself into my mind. The black water, the pale hands reaching, the scratches below. Proof that what I had seen was no dream, no trick of sleepless eyes. Someone had been down there once, clawing, trapped. Maybe not once, maybe many times. The rest of the day, the passengers went about their leisure, sipping cocktails and baking in the sun as though nothing waited beneath the surface. But whenever I passed the pool, I felt the weight of it pressing against the roped barrier, the silence heavy as if the thing below was only resting. By afternoon, workers began refilling it, the water pouring in steady streams, washing over the gouges and grooves. hiding them beneath a glossy, perfect surface. Soon it would look clean again, inviting, another amenity for passengers to enjoy. But I knew the truth. The marks would still be there, waiting, even if no one else could see them. That night, as the ship swayed under the moonlight, I dreamed of those claw marks, of pale hands dragging across tile, nails cracking, blood streaking faint against white. And in the dream, when I leaned close to look, I realized the grooves weren't random at all. They spelled something, letters, words, carved in desperation. But before I could read them, the pool filled black again, and the hands rose once more to claim me. That final night, the ship felt heavier, as though the weight of what lay beneath pressed against its steel. I told myself I would avoid the pool entirely, that I would stay in my cabin with the lights on until dawn. But the sound drew me out. It began faint, a rhythmic drip that echoed through the corridor. I followed it, heart racing, certain I would find a leaky pipe or an overflowing drain. Yet the farther I walked, the clearer it became. Not random, not scattered, steady, measured, the cadence of footsteps. When I reached the deck, the pool lay roped off, still bone dry from its so-called maintenance. Its tiles gleamed pale in the moonlight, flawless again, as though the gouges I had seen had been erased. And yet, from the railings above, drops fell one after another, dark and steady, striking the deck with hollow splats. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was deafening in the silence, too loud for water that should not exist. The air itself smelled damp, heavy with brine, as though the sea had seeped onto the deck. I tilted my head upward, and my blood ran cold. Wet footprints trailed along the railing, as though someone had climbed, dripping from the pool that was empty. They wound in a slow circle, following the edge, circling closer to where I stood. My chest clenched. The sound of the dripping quickened, sinking with my pulse, until it no longer sounded like water, but the echo of something pacing me. I backed away, my steps loud against the deck. The dripping followed, always just behind, though no one walked there. I spun, desperate to catch whoever or whatever stalked me, but the deck was barren, lit only by the weak glow of overhead lamps. Yet the footprints multiplied, slick and shining in the moonlight, closing in from every direction. The smell of the ocean swelled, suffocating, as though the sea itself had risen onto the ship. My throat tightened, my lungs burned, and then I heard it. Laughter again, high, brittle, echoing across the steel. The giggle of a child, twisted, hollow, chasing me down the length of the pool. I ran. My legs moved of their own accord, my hands clawing at the air as the sound of dripping and laughter followed close behind. No matter how far I fled, I could still hear it, the relentless cadence of water striking steel, patient, steady footsteps that did not need a body to walk them. By now, the time I reached my cabin and slammed the door shut, the sound had burrowed inside me, etched deep like the claw marks at the bottom of that pool. Because I understood now. The pool never truly emptied. It only hid what it held. And once it had fixed its gaze on you, its footsteps would follow, whether on the deck, in the corridors, or in the dark just outside your door. The ship loomed over the harbor like an aging beast, its white paint peeling in long curls, the steel beneath streaked with rust that bled down to the waterline. I boarded with the others, my footsteps echoing against hollow decks that felt too quiet, too empty, as though the vessel itself resented being awakened. The crew smiled, but their eyes were tired, restless, watching the sea more than the passengers. Whispers followed us, even before we left port. This was her final voyage, they said. After years of service, after countless crossings, she would be decommissioned, stripped, and left to rot in some forgotten dock. But that wasn't all. There were other whispers, darker ones, spoken low over clinking glasses in the lounge. Accidents. Cabins locked from the inside, discovered with no one in them. Passengers who vanished between meals, their names erased from rosters as if they had never boarded. A child who drowned in the pool though the water had been calm, shallow, and crowded with watchful eyes. A fire that supposedly broke out below deck, though no official record remained. Each rumor carried the weight of truth hidden under layers of denial. Each passenger eager to dismiss it, even as their voices shook. I walked those hushed hallways my first night, the carpet frayed, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. The air smelled of salt and oil, tinged with something stale, like damp fabric locked away too long. Each turn led me past doors that seemed to listen, their brass numbers dulled and worn, the silence behind them heavier than any laughter spilling from the lounges. Every corner felt stretched too long, as though the ship did not quite match the space it occupied. I kept thinking I heard footsteps behind me, measured, deliberate. But when I turned, the hall was empty. Only shadows, stretched thin by the flicker of tired bulbs. Passengers huddled together in groups, their cheer forced, their smiles thin. They spoke of accidents like people testing the sharp edge of a blade, daring each other to lean too close. One woman swore her cousin had sailed years ago on this very ship and never returned. Another whispered about an entire family who had been here one voyage and gone the next, their belongings still neatly arranged in their cabin. When I returned to my room, the walls creaked like bones shifting in the dark. I lay awake listening to the ship breathe, the engines thrumming beneath me, the sea lapping against steel. Yet underneath it all was something else. A pulse. A rhythm that was not mechanical but alive, steady, waiting. And as sleep finally took me, I dreamed of the ship itself opening its rust-streaked hull, swallowing every passenger whole, carrying us not to any port, but somewhere colder, darker, final. Because a vessel that has carried so much death does not retire. It remembers. It waits. And on its last voyage, it always takes more with it. By the second night, the rumors grew teeth. I awoke to raised voices in the corridor, passengers whispering sharp and urgent as crew members passed quickly by, their eyes averted. I slipped from my cabin, pressing close to the wall, listening. A family had reported their father missing. They swore he had gone to bed in their shared cabin. But when morning came, his bunk was neatly made, his suitcase unopened, his passport resting untouched on the nightstand. The crew dismissed it as confusion, yet the panic in the family's eyes told me they knew better. The following night, it happened again. A young woman this time, her shoes still lined neatly by the door, her cosmetics arranged in careful order on the counter. Her bed had not been slept in. Her laughter, which I had heard just hours before in the lounge, was replaced by silence that pressed too heavy for comfort. The ship's staff spoke in rehearsed tones, assuring passengers that everyone was accounted for, that no one was missing. But I had seen the crew sealing doors quietly at dawn, brass numbers dulled by hasty hands. Entire cabins locked without explanation, luggage sealed inside, the owners scrubbed from the manifest as if they had never existed. Each day the halls grew emptier. Smiles in the dining room faltered, voices lowered. People clutched their loved ones tighter, fearful of being left alone even for a moment. And always, the ship groaned with that strange rhythm in its bones, like a heartbeat counting down. One night I walked the halls and saw shadows flicker beneath locked doors, movement where no passenger remained. I leaned close and heard faint knocking from within, steady, like fingernails on wood. When I stepped back, the sound stopped, and the silence returned, heavy and absolute. By the fourth night, no one dared to speak of it openly, but fear pulsed through every glance, every hurried step. Cabins vanished from memory, names faded, and still the ship carried on across black water, unbothered, inevitable. I began to notice something strange in the eyes of the crew. Exhaustion, yes, but also resignation. As though they had seen this before. As though they knew the ship itself chose who would remain and who would be erased. Their assurances were hollow because they had stopped fighting long ago. I returned to my cabin, heart hammering, the walls trembling with the ship's low pulse. I locked the door, bolted it, shoved a chair against the handle. But deep inside, I understood the futility of it. Locks did not matter here, neither did bolts or chairs, because this vessel had carried ghosts long before I set foot on it, and it was clear now it would not sail quietly into retirement. No, on its final voyage, it was still feeding, still claiming passengers one by one, as it had always done. And sooner or later, it would come for me too. The crew's voices grew more polished with every disappearance, their reassurances smoother, more rehearsed. All passengers are accounted for. Nothing unusual has occurred. Enjoy your voyage. The words rolled from their tongues like a script practiced to perfection, but their eyes betrayed them. The way they scanned the hallways, the way their smiles slipped when they thought no one was looking. Yet their lies did nothing to disguise the truth. The dining hall told it. The first night, it had been alive with chatter, silverware clinking, glasses lifted in toast. Now, by the third night, the tables stretched half empty, white linens glaring like blank faces beneath the flicker of chandeliers. Conversations died quickly. Laughter felt forced. Passengers stared at their plates as though silence itself were safer. I sat at a table near the window, the vast, black sea pressing its weight against the glass. My fork trembled in my hand as I counted the missing. The couple who had danced on the first night, were gone. The family with the father who vanished. Now none of them remained. Entire tables stood stripped bare, napkins folded neatly, as if waiting for people who would never return. The silence thickened like fog, seeping into every corner. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed muted, subdued, as though the ship itself muffled the noise. I kept glancing toward the doors, half expecting to see the missing wander in, pale and disoriented, but they never did. Only shadows seemed to move there, fleeting, gone when I blinked. One man rose, his voice cracking as he demanded answers from the crew. Why were passengers vanishing? Why were cabins sealed? Why did the ship sail on as though nothing had happened? A hush fell instantly, the air electric with dread. The crew member at the door only smiled, too wide, too sharp, and repeated the script. All passengers are accounted for. The man's protest wilted into silence, and he sat pale, his hands shaking so badly the wine sloshed in his glass. He did not return the next night. I left the dining hall early, the silence pressing against me as I walked the deserted corridors. The carpet swallowed my steps, the walls breathed faintly, the lights buzzed low and tired. It felt less like a ship now and more like a mausoleum, carrying us deeper into a sea that wanted us all. Back in my cabin, I locked the door again, though it felt like locking myself inside a coffin. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard it. Faint knocks, rhythmic like someone trapped on the other side of the steel. A voice, muffled, almost human, whispering in a language I could not understand. I pressed my hands to my ears and lay trembling, but it followed me into sleep. The the sound of chairs scraping across the dining hall floor, of silverware clinking though no one remained to eat, of silence closing in, tighter and tighter, until it felt ready to smother us all. I woke to the faint groan of metal, a sound too deliberate to be the ship's usual breathing. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, my heart stuttering when I realized my door stood wide open. I was certain I had locked it, bolted it, even pressed the chair against the handle before collapsing into restless sleep. Yet now it gaped, a mouth opening onto the corridor beyond. I sat up, every nerve raw, and saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, long and wavering, gliding down the hallway without sound. They stretched across the carpet, bending in ways that did not match human figures. They moved in a slow, steady procession, their shapes half-formed, slipping between solid and smoke. And all of them drifted in the same direction, toward the lifeboats. I rose, my legs unsteady, drawn to the doorway against my will. The air was colder out there, damp, carrying the faint smell of salt and rust. I pressed my back to the wall, watching the shapes pass. Some tall, some small, their features lost in the blur of shadow, but their movement unmistakable. They were not wandering. They were marching, summoned by something I could not see. I followed at a distance, my breath shallow, every step an act of betrayal to the part of me screaming to stay behind. The corridor stretched endlessly, the hum of the ship's engines fading into silence as though the world itself held its breath. The shadows glided ahead, unhurried, patient, never looking back. When we reached the deck, the night air hit me sharp, carrying the endless black of the sea. The lifeboats loomed above, pale in the moonlight, swaying gently though the waters below were calm as glass. The shadows gathered beneath them, crowding together in silent ranks. For a moment, they seemed to solidify. I saw faces pale as bone, eyes dark and hollow, clothes dripping with seawater though no tide touched the deck. The line was endless, stretching down the deck until it vanished into dark. One figure turned. I froze. It was a woman, her eyes black pits, her lips moving soundlessly. She raised her hand as though beckoning me closer. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of brine. My skin prickled, my lungs fought for air. Behind her, more heads turned, more eyes fixed on me. And I knew then this was no dream. This was the ship revealing what it carried. Not passengers, not travelers, but a procession of the lost, replaying their final muster over and over. The lifeboats creaked above, their ropes straining, their shadows stretching across the deck like gaping jaws. I stumbled back into the corridor, heart racing, slamming my door shut once more. But long after I pressed my back to it, shaking, I could still hear the soundless march of shadows, still see their pale faces lingering in my mind. And I knew, one night soon, they would not pass me by. They would stop at my door. The last night arrived with a silence so heavy, it felt like the air itself was sinking. I stepped into the corridor and found it empty. Doors sealed, brass numbers dulled, as if they had been erased by time itself. The hum of the engines continued, steady and endless. But the human sounds, the laughter, the footsteps, the clink of glasses, were gone. The ship was still full of bodies. I could feel it. But few of them belonged to the living. I wandered the hallways, each one darker than the last, until I reached the promenade deck. The windows stretched in a long row, revealing the vast blackness of the sea. But it wasn't the ocean that stole my breath. It was the faces. They pressed against the glass from the inside of cabins I knew were empty, pale and still, their eyes fixed on me. Men, women, children, their expressions blank, unblinking, each face framed by darkness deeper than shadow. Their mouths hung open as if mid-scream, but no sound escaped, no breath fogged the glass. As I walked, they followed, their heads turning in unison, watching me pass as though my movement alone stirred them. The sight locked my chest, froze my blood. I tried not to meet their eyes, but it was impossible. Each window was filled with them, each cabin crowded with the dead. The ship itself seemed to carry them forward, relentless, sailing deeper into black water where no stars shone, where the horizon vanished into nothing. I pressed my hand to the railing, grounding myself, though the steel vibrated like a living thing. The vessel was alive, pulsing, carrying its cargo of silence and shadows with grim determination. I stopped before one window, unable to move. The face staring back was the young woman who had vanished that second night. Her hair floated as if underwater, her hand pressed flat to the glass, her eyes empty but fixed on me as if she recognized me still. My throat closed, my knees buckled, and I stumbled away. The corridor stretched longer and longer, filled with windows, filled with faces, each one a passenger I had seen alive only days before. All erased, all staring, all waiting. I reached the end of the deck and dared one final glance. Every face, every hollow stare, every frozen mouth aligned, watching me with perfect stillness. The silence behind the glass was unbearable, suffocating, as if they were screaming where no sound could escape. The ship pressed on into endless black, the water swallowing the horizon whole. My reflection blurred in the glass, pale and shaking, surrounded by faces that were no longer alive, but not gone either. And in that moment, I understood. This was not a final voyage for the ship. It was for us. Because some vessels are not meant to retire. They are meant to carry the lost forever. And I was already counted among them,